At my son's wedding, I witnessed something that no parent should ever have to see. A small packet, a subtle movement, my glass of champagne. He thought I was just an old man lost among the fading flowers. When he turned away to adjust the microphone, I didn't react. I didn't make a sound. I stayed calm. I simply swapped the glasses, securing the tampered one as evidence while replacing it with an untouched drink. Moments later, he stood up, offered a toast, and said, "To my father's health." Then he drank from the glass. Everything changed. I appreciate you staying with me this far. If this opening caught your attention, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I read everyone. Also, a quick note, parts of this story are adapted for narrative and educational effect. Any resemblance to real names or events is unintentional, though the perspective behind it might still resonate. My name is Isaiah Washington, but on the streets of Chicago they still call me Zeke. I am 72 years old. My hands are rough like sandpaper, and my back hurts when it rains, but my eyes see everything. I spent 50 years in construction, starting as a laborer, mixing concrete, and ending up owning the biggest minority contracting firm in the state. I know how to spot a crack in a foundation before the house even settles. And sitting there at table 1 in the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel, I was looking at a very deep crack. This wedding cost $200,000. Every penny came from my retirement account. My son Marcus told me it was necessary. He said that to marry a girl like Tiffany St. James, we had to show her family that we were not just some laborers from the South Side. We had to show class. I looked around the room. There were crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than my first house. There were 400 guests and I didn't know half of them. They were Tiffany's people. They were people who had never held a shovel in their lives. They were people who smiled at me with their teeth, but their eyes looked at my old tuxedo like it was a rag. I sat there feeling the heavy linen napkin in my hand, thinking about the sacrifices I made. I raised Marcus alone after his mother, Clara, passed. I wanted him to have the life I never had. I didn't want him to have concrete dust in his lungs. I didn't want him to come home with bleeding knuckles, so I sent him to private schools. I bought him cars. I paid for a college degree he never used. I built a soft world for him. And that was my mistake. When you build a house with soft wood, it rots. Marcus had rotted. He was 32 years old and he had never worked a hard day in his life. He called himself an entrepreneur, but mostly he just gambled. He gambled on stocks. He gambled on sports. He gambled on businesses that didn't exist. And every time he lost, he came to me. "Dad, I just need a bridge loan. Dad, this is the last time. Dad, if I don't pay them, they will hurt me." And I paid. Every time I paid. Because he was my son. Because Clara made me promise to take care of him. But Tiffany was different. She was beautiful in a way that looked expensive. She had blonde hair that was perfectly styled and a smile that could freeze water. She came from a family that acted rich, but I had done my research. The St. James family was broke. They were drowning in debt, just like Marcus. They saw me not as a father-in-law, but as a winning lottery ticket. I knew they were desperate, but I didn't know how desperate until the waiter poured the champagne for the toasts. I was sitting alone at the head table because Tiffany said there wasn't enough room for my friends. My friends were guys named Big Mike and Sal, guys who drove trucks and laid brick. They were sitting at table 40 near the kitchen doors. I was isolated, just me and the sharks. Marcus was standing to my right, nervously adjusting his silk tie. He was sweating even though the air conditioning was freezing. Tiffany was to his right, whispering something in his ear. She looked at me and then looked at the glass in front of me. Her eyes were cold, hard, like the steel beams I used to weld. That was when I saw it. The waiter had moved away to serve the next table. Marcus thought I was looking at the band. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small clear packet. It was fast. If you blinked, you would have missed it. He poured a fine white powder into my champagne flute. The bubbles fizzed up for a second and then settled. The powder dissolved instantly. My heart stopped beating for a second. It felt like a sledgehammer had hit me in the chest. My own son. The boy I taught to ride a bike. The boy I sat up with when he had the flu. The boy I built a kingdom for. He was trying to drug me, or worse. For a moment, I wanted to stand up and flip the table. I wanted to grab him by the collar and scream. I wanted to be the old Zeke who would fight 3 men in a bar and win. But then I looked at Tiffany. She was watching him with a hungry look. This wasn't just Marcus. This was a plan. If I made a scene now, they would call me crazy. They would say I was a senile old man ruining the wedding. They would play the victims. And I would still be in danger. No, I needed to be smarter. I needed to be the foreman, not the laborer. Marcus turned his back to me to tap the microphone. He was calling for silence. He was preparing to give the speech of his life. Tiffany was busy smoothing her dress, making sure she looked perfect for the cameras. I moved. It was instinct. It was the muscle memory of a man who spent 50 years catching falling tools and dodging swinging beams. My hand shot out. I grabbed my glass and I grabbed his glass. I didn't lift them high. I slid them across the tablecloth. Smooth. Silent. I switched them. It took less than 2 seconds. I sat back and folded my hands over my stomach. I put a confused smile on my face, the mask of a harmless old man. Marcus turned back around. He looked at the table. He didn't notice a thing. He picked up the glass that was sitting exactly where he left his, the glass that was now full of clean, expensive champagne. He held it up. The room went quiet. 400 people turned to look at us. The spotlight hit us. Marcus looked handsome in his tuxedo, but I could see the sweat dripping down his temple. His hand was shaking just a little bit. "Friends, family," he started, his voice booming through the speakers. "Thank you for coming to celebrate our love. But before I toast my beautiful bride, I want to make a toast to the man who made this all possible." He turned to me. He looked me right in the eyes. And for a second, I saw hesitation. I saw fear. But then he looked past me at the empty chair where Clara should have been, and he hardened. "To my father, Isaiah, a man who taught me that you have to do whatever it takes to survive. Dad, I love you. This is for you." He gestured for me to pick up my glass. I reached out. My hand was steady as a rock. I picked up the glass that he had poisoned, the glass he thought would be my last drink. I stood up. I looked at him. I looked at Tiffany. She was smiling a tight, victorious smile. She thought she had won. She thought the old contractor was about to check out and leave them the keys to the castle. "To the happy couple," I said. My voice was rough and deep. "May you get exactly what you deserve." I touched my glass to his. The crystal rang out with a clear, sharp sound like a bell tolling. Marcus smiled, a relieved, greedy smile. He tipped his head back and drank. He drank the whole thing in one long swallow. He wanted to get it over with. He wanted to wash down his guilt. I brought my glass to my lips. I let the liquid touch my tongue, but I didn't swallow. I just held it there, tasting the victory. Marcus put his glass down. He turned to the crowd. He opened his mouth to say something else, probably to introduce the band or ask for money. Then his eyes went wide. He grabbed his throat. The microphone fell from his hand and hit the floor with a screech of feedback that made everyone cover their ears. Marcus stumbled back. He knocked over his chair. He looked at me with pure confusion. He couldn't understand. He had watched me drink. Why was he the one who couldn't breathe? His face turned red, then purple. He gasped for air like a fish on a dock. His legs gave out and he collapsed onto the floor of the stage. He was convulsing. Foam started to form at the corners of his mouth. Tiffany screamed. It was a high, piercing sound that shattered the celebration. She dropped her own glass and it smashed on the dance floor. "Marcus," she yelled, falling to her knees beside him. "Marcus, what is happening?" She looked at me. Her eyes were wild. She knew. She knew exactly what was happening because she knew what was in that powder. She looked at my glass. It was still full. She looked at Marcus's empty glass. The realization hit her like a freight train. The room erupted into chaos. People were screaming. The mother of the bride fainted. Guests were running toward the stage. Someone was yelling to call 911. I didn't move. I stood there calm and still in the middle of the storm. I looked down at my son writhing on the floor, clutching his chest, fighting for every breath. I took a slow sip of my champagne. It was crisp, cold, and it tasted like justice. I leaned down close to him while Tiffany was screaming at the guests to stay back. I wanted him to hear me. I wanted him to know. I put my hand on his shoulder like a comforting father, but I whispered in his ear so only he could hear. "You mixed the concrete, son," I said. "Now you have to walk in it." This wasn't just a wedding gone wrong. This was a declaration of war. And as the sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer and closer, I knew one thing for sure. The boy I raised was dead. The man on the floor was my enemy. And I was just getting started. The room didn't just get quiet, it shattered. One moment there was the clinking of crystal and the hum of polite conversation. And the next, there was a sound that haunts you. The sound of 400 people realizing something is terribly wrong. It started with a gasp, a collective intake of breath that sucked the air right out of the ballroom. Then the screaming started. It wasn't the kind of screaming you hear in movies. It was ugly. It was jagged. It was the sound of rich people who had never seen death up close, realizing that their money couldn't buy them a way out of this room. I stood over my son watching the chaos unfold with the detached precision of a foreman watching a controlled demolition. Marcus was thrashing on the floor, his heels drumming a frantic rhythm against the expensive hardwood stage. His hands were clawing at his throat, tearing at the silk tie I had bought him, trying to open an airway that was closing up tighter than a bank vault on a Sunday. Foam, pink and frothy, was bubbling at the corners of his mouth, spilling onto the lapel of his tuxedo. Tiffany was the first to move. She didn't drop to her knees to perform CPR. She didn't grab his hand to comfort him. No! She jumped up and pointed a shaking manicured finger at the catering staff standing by the kitchen doors. "It's the food!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with a hysteria that sounded almost rehearsed. "It is food poisoning. They poisoned him. The lobster bisque. I knew it. Someone call an ambulance. It is the food. She was good. I had to give her that." In the middle of a disaster, she was already spinning the narrative. She needed a scapegoat, and the poor kitchen staff making minimum wage were the easiest targets in the room. By blaming the food, she was trying to divert attention away from the glass, away from the poison, away from the fact that her husband was dying from a dose meant for his father. The guests bought it immediately. I saw panic ripple through the crowd like a wave. People started dropping their forks. Some clutched their stomachs, convinced they were feeling symptoms that weren't there. A woman at table 3 knocked her chair over, trying to get away from her plate. It was mass hysteria, and it was the perfect cover. But I wasn't looking at the guests. I wasn't looking at the terrified waiters. I was watching Tiffany. She was looking at Marcus, but she wasn't looking at his face. She was staring at his chest. Specifically, she was staring at the left breast pocket of his jacket, the pocket where I had seen him stash the empty wrapper of the powder just minutes before. She knew it was there. And she knew that if the paramedics or the police found that wrapper with the residue inside her story about bad lobster, would fall apart faster than a cheap drywall job. She made her move. "Oh my God, Marcus!" she wailed, throwing herself onto the floor beside him. She draped her body over his, blocking him from the view of the crowd. She pretended to be the grieving, hysterical bride hugging her dying husband. But I saw her hand. Her right hand was sliding under his arm, creeping toward that pocket like a snake in the grass. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think. I just moved. I dropped to my knees beside them, playing the part of the terrified father. I moved fast for an old man, faster than she expected. "Give him air!" I shouted, my voice booming over the commotion. "Everyone get back! He needs air!" I shifted my weight. I planted my left foot firmly on the ground, and then with all the clumsiness of a panicked senior citizen, I brought my right foot down. I stepped hard. I didn't step on the floor. I stepped directly on Tiffany's hand just as her fingers were brushing the fabric of Marcus's pocket. I felt the crunch of her delicate fingers under the hard sole of my dress shoe. It wasn't enough to break bones, but it was enough to cause blinding shock. Tiffany let out a shriek that was louder than her screams for the ambulance. She yanked her hand back, clutching it to her chest, her eyes wide with shock and pain. She looked up at me, her mascara running down her face, her expression twisting from grief to pure, venomous rage. I looked back at her with wide, innocent eyes. "I am so sorry, honey," I stammered, my voice trembling with fake frailty. I lost my balance. "I am just so worried about my boy. Are you okay?" She couldn't say anything. She couldn't scream. "You stomped on my hand while I was trying to hide evidence." She just had to take it. She had to swallow the pain and the rage because 60 million eyes were on us. She nodded, tears of actual pain finally leaking from her eyes. "Move back, Tiffany," I said, grabbing her shoulder and shoving her gently but firmly away. "You are crowding him. Let his father help him." She tried to resist, but with a crushed hand and a room full of witnesses, she had no leverage. She scrambled back, nursing her throbbing fingers, watching me with the eyes of a cornered rat. I turned back to Marcus. He was starting to turn blue. His eyes were rolled back in his head, showing the whites. He was fading. I leaned over him, shielding his torso with my broad back. To the room, it looked like a father lovingly loosening his son's tie, trying to help him breathe. I grabbed the knot of his tie and yanked it loose. I undid the top button of his shirt. Then with a movement as smooth as a card shark dealing from the bottom of the deck, I slipped 2 fingers into his breast pocket. I felt it. The crinkle of plastic. The small foil packet. I pinched it between my fingers and slid it out. In one fluid motion, it went from his pocket to the inside of my sleeve, tucked safely against my wristwatch. I patted his chest, looking for all the world like I was checking his heart rate. "Hang in there, son," I whispered loud enough for the people in the front row to hear. "Help is coming." But in my head, I was saying something very different. I was thinking, I got you. I had the weapon, I had the motive, and now I had the proof. The doors to the ballroom burst open. The paramedics rushed in, pushing a gurney, their radios squawking static and codes. Behind them came two uniformed police officers looking stern and ready for trouble. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. The paramedics swarmed the stage, pushing me aside to get to Marcus. They started shouting vitals, ripping open his shirt, attaching leads to his chest. "Pulse is thready," one of them shouted. "We need to intubate." "He is crashing." I stood up, brushing the dust off the knees of my tuxedo. I checked my sleeve. The packet was secure. I looked at Tiffany. She was standing by the edge of the stage, holding her injured hand, cradling it against her body. She was pale. She was watching the paramedics work on Marcus, but every few seconds her eyes darted to me. She was trying to figure out if I had seen anything. She was trying to figure out if I knew. She stepped toward the police officers. She put on her best damsel in distress face. "Officers," she sobbed, pointing toward the kitchen. "You have to arrest the chef. They poisoned him." It was the food. I know it was the food. He ate the appetizer, and then this happened. The cop, a young guy who looked overwhelmed by the fancy wedding, started to pull out his notepad. He looked like he believed her. Why wouldn't he? She was a pretty blonde girl in a white dress, crying her eyes out. "Ma'am, calm down," the officer said. "We will talk to the kitchen staff. I couldn't let that happen. If they treated this as food poisoning, they would secure the kitchen, not the table. They would test the lobster, not the champagne. And by the time they realized their mistake, the glasses would be washed, the table cleared, and the evidence gone." I stepped forward. I straightened my spine. I let the confusion drop from my face and replaced it with the authority of a man who had commanded crews of 200 men on skyscrapers. "Officer," I said, my voice cutting through Tiffany's sobbing. The cop turned to me. "Yes, sir. Are you the father?" "I am," I said. "And you are not going to the kitchen. You are going to seal off this stage." Tiffany's head snapped toward me. "What are you talking about, Isaiah?" she hissed. "It was obviously the food. Don't confuse them." I ignored her. I walked right up to the cop until I was occupying his personal space. I pointed a finger at the table where the two champagne flutes were sitting, one empty, one full. "Officer, I want you to bag those glasses," I said, "and I want you to take samples of everything on this table." "Why?" the cop asked, looking confused. "Because this wasn't food poisoning," I said loud and clear. "My son didn't eat the appetizer. He only drank the toast." I looked at Tiffany. Her face had gone the color of old milk. "Someone tried to kill my son," I declared, "and I don't think they are in the kitchen. I think they are in this room." The cop's demeanor changed instantly. He went from handling a medical emergency to securing a crime scene. He tapped his radio. "Dispatch, we have a potential attempted homicide at the Four Seasons. Send backup and crime scene." Tiffany gasped. "No, you are crazy," she shouted. "It was an accident. It was the food." "Secure the scene," the cop ordered his partner, ignoring her. "Nobody touches that table. Nobody leaves this room until we get names." I watched as the partner started stringing yellow tape around the head table. I watched as the paramedics loaded Marcus onto the gurney and started wheeling him out. I watched as Tiffany realized her plan to wash away the evidence had just failed. I walked over to the cop. I kept my voice low. "My son needs me," I said. "I am going to the hospital, but I want you to make sure those glasses are tested for everything, not just salmonella. Everything." The cop nodded. "We will handle it, sir. Go be with your son." I turned to leave. I walked past Tiffany. She was shaking. She looked like she wanted to scratch my eyes out, but she was too terrified to move. I stopped right next to her. I leaned in close. "You should get that hand looked at," I whispered. "It looks swollen. Would hate for you not to be able to sign a statement later." I didn't wait for her response. I followed the gurney out of the ballroom, leaving the chaos behind me. As I walked through the lobby of the hotel, people were staring, whispering, pointing. They saw a devastated father. They didn't see the plastic packet tucked into my sleeve. They didn't see the fire burning in my gut. I got into the back of the ambulance just before they closed the doors. The siren wailed to life. I looked down at Marcus. He was unconscious, a tube down his throat, a machine breathing for him. He looked small, helpless. I wasn't worried about him dying. The dose was meant for a 72-year-old man, not a 32-year-old buck. He would survive. His body would recover. But his life, that was over. I sat back against the metal wall of the ambulance and felt the vibration of the road beneath me. I touched the packet in my sleeve again just to make sure it was real. The game had changed. They wanted to play dirty. They wanted to use poison and lies. Fine. I looked out the back window as the hotel disappeared into the distance. I hope you are ready, Tiffany, I thought. Because I am not just going to beat you, I am going to break you, and I am going to use the law, the truth, and every single dime I have to do it. The ambulance sped into the night carrying a poisoner, his victim, and the only man who knew the difference. The hospital waiting room smelled like antiseptic and floor wax, a sharp chemical sting that burned the back of my throat. It was 2 a.m. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with a headache-inducing flicker, casting long, pale shadows across the linoleum floor. I sat in a hard plastic chair, my tuxedo jacket folded neatly on my lap, watching the doors to the intensive care unit. I wasn't praying. I wasn't crying. I was waiting. Tiffany was pacing back and forth in front of the vending machine, still wearing her wedding dress. The hem was stained with grease from the ambulance floor and dirt from the street. She looked like a beauty queen who had survived a car wreck. Every few minutes, she would stop and glare at me, her eyes red-rimmed and hateful, but she didn't say a word. She couldn't. Not with the 2 police officers standing by the nurse's station drinking stale coffee and watching us. I checked the time on my old analog watch. It had been 40 minutes since they wheeled Marcus through those double doors. 40 minutes of tubes and wires and machines trying to pump the poison out of his system. The poison he had meant for me. The double doors swung open with a heavy swoosh of air. A doctor stepped out. He looked tired. He was young, maybe 40, with graying temples and a stethoscope hanging around his neck like a noose. He held a clipboard against his chest. "Family of Marcus Washington," he called out softly. Tiffany sprinted toward him, her heels clicking frantically on the tiles. I stood up slowly, my knees popping, and walked over with the heavy measured steps of a man who knows bad news is coming, but refuses to run to meet it. I am his wife. Tiffany, breathless, grabbing the doctor's arm. "Is he okay? Please tell me he is going to be okay." The doctor gently removed her hand from his arm. He looked at her and then he looked at me. He saw the tension. He saw that we weren't standing together like a family in crisis, but like 2 boxers in opposite corners. "Mr. Washington is stable for now," the doctor said, choosing his words carefully. "We have him on a ventilator to assist his breathing, and we have managed to stabilize his heart rate. But he is in a coma." "A coma?" Tiffany gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. "Oh my God." "It is medically induced," the doctor explained. "We need to keep his body calm while we flush the toxins." "Toxins?" Tiffany said, her voice sharpening just a fraction. "You mean the food poisoning?" "The lobster. I told the paramedics it was the lobster." The doctor shook his head. His expression hardened. "Mrs. Washington, we pumped his stomach. We ran a preliminary toxicology screen. This wasn't food poisoning. There was no bacteria, no salmonella, no shellfish reaction." "Then what was it?" she demanded, taking a step back. "It was a chemical cocktail," the doctor said, his voice dropping an octave. "A very specific and very dangerous mixture. We found high concentrations of a synthetic sedative, likely something used for large animals, mixed with a potent cardiac stimulant. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Sedative to knock me out. Stimulant to make it look like a heart attack. It was a professional job. Or at least it was supposed to be. The combination is deadly." The doctor continued. "The sedative suppresses the respiratory system while the stimulant sends the heart into overdrive. The body essentially tears itself apart, trying to do 2 opposite things at once. If he hadn't been intubated immediately, his heart would have exploded." Tiffany went pale. She wasn't acting now. This was real fear. She was realizing just how close she had come to killing her husband instead of her father-in-law. "We need to run a full forensic toxicology panel," the doctor said, flipping a page on his clipboard. "We need to identify the exact compounds and their source so we can tailor the antidote protocol. And given the nature of the substances, we are legally required to involve the police fully." "This wasn't an accident." Tiffany's head snapped up. "No," she said too quickly. "No, that isn't necessary." "Excuse me." The doctor blinked, confused. "We don't want a full screen," she said, her voice rising, getting shrill. "Marcus has a reputation. He is a businessman. If this gets out, if people think he was taking drugs or overdosed, it will ruin him. We have to think about the family name. She reached for the clipboard. I will sign a waiver, she said, the words tumbling out of her mouth in a rush. We decline further testing. Just treat him. Just wake him up. We will handle the rest privately. We don't want the police involved any more than they already are. It is a family matter. She was trying to bury it. She knew a deep forensic scan would trace the drugs. It might trace where they were bought. Or who bought them. She wanted to classify this as an accidental overdose, a party mistake, something shameful but not criminal. She wanted to erase the evidence while it was still flowing through his veins. The doctor pulled the clipboard back. Ma'am, this is a life or death situation. Without knowing the exact dosage and chemical makeup, we are fighting blind, and this looks like attempted homicide. I cannot just... I am his wife, she screamed, slamming her hand onto the reception desk. I am his next of kin. I have the legal right to make medical decisions for him when he is incapacitated. And I am telling you, no more tests. No police report. Do your job and save him, but keep the law out of it. She glared at the doctor, daring him to challenge her. She was used to getting her way. She was used to bullying service workers and clerks. She thought a white coat was just another uniform she could command. The doctor looked uncomfortable. He looked at the police officers who were now watching with interest. He looked at the clipboard. Technically, she is right, he murmured, looking at me with an apologetic expression. As his spouse, she has medical power of attorney by default, unless there is a document that says otherwise, I interrupted. My voice was gravel and steel. It cut through Tiffany's hysteria like a circular saw through soft pine. I reached into the inside pocket of my tuxedo jacket. I didn't pull out the packet of poison. Not yet. I pulled out a folded piece of legal paper. It was creased and worn soft at the edges from years of being filed away in my safe, but the seal was still gold and the signatures were still black ink. 5 years ago, I said, stepping between Tiffany and the doctor, Marcus got into a motorcycle accident. He was in the hospital for 2 weeks. He was single then. He was scared. He didn't trust anyone but his daddy to make the calls. I unfolded the paper and smoothed it out on the reception desk right next to Tiffany's trembling hand. He signed a durable medical power of attorney, I said, tapping the signature line with my thick, calloused finger, appointing Isaiah Washington as his sole agent for all healthcare decisions in the event of incapacitation. Tiffany stared at the paper. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. He never revoked it, I said, looking her dead in the eye. He forgot. Or maybe deep down he knew he would need me to save him from you one day. I turned to the doctor. Doctor, I said, I am authorizing the full panel. I want you to test for everything. I want you to find every milligram of whatever poison is in my boy's blood. And I want you to make 3 copies of the report. 1 for you, 1 for the police, and 1 for me. But that is old, Tiffany stammered, grabbing at the paper. We are married now. That supersedes... Read the clause at the bottom, I snapped. This document remains in effect until explicitly revoked in writing by the principal. Marriage does not void it. Marcus was lazy, Tiffany. He never did the paperwork. The doctor looked at the document. He checked the date. He checked the notary stamp. He nodded. This looks valid, Mr. Washington, he said. I will scan this into his file immediately. We will proceed with the full toxicology screen. Thank you, doctor, I said. Tiffany looked like she was going to be sick. She had lost control. The one thing she needed to hide, the smoking gun, was now going to be analyzed, cataloged, and handed to the detectives. She backed away. I need a moment, she whispered. I feel faint. I need some water. She turned and walked quickly down the hallway, away from the ICU, away from the police, away from me. She turned the corner toward the vending machines and the public restrooms. I watched her go. I waited 3 seconds. Then I followed. I didn't walk like a 72-year-old man. I walked on the balls of my feet, silent as a shadow. I learned how to move quietly on job sites so I could catch my guys slacking off. It is a skill that never leaves you. I turned the corner. The hallway was empty except for Tiffany. She was standing by the large window at the end of the corridor, looking out at the parking lot lights. She wasn't getting water. She had her phone pressed to her ear. I stopped about 10 feet away in the shadow of a linen cart. I held my breath. Pick up, she hissed into the phone. Her voice was shaking with panic. Then she stiffened. Someone had answered. It is me, she whispered. It is a disaster. A complete disaster. She paused, listening. No, you don't understand, she said, her voice dropping even lower. The plan failed. The old man is alive. He didn't drink it. My heart hammered against my ribs. There it was. The confession. I don't know how she continued, tears of frustration leaking into her voice. It was chaotic. Maybe the waiter switched them. Maybe Marcus made a mistake. But Isaiah is fine. He is walking around ordering doctors and talking to the police. And Marcus drank it. He is in a coma. She listened again. She started biting her thumbnail nervously. Yes, they are running tests. The old man has a power of attorney. I couldn't stop it. They are going to find the compound. They are going to trace it back to the pharmacy. She turned slightly, and I pressed myself flat against the wall. You have to clean it up, she hissed. Go to the apartment. Get rid of the rest of the supply. And the laptop. Burn the hard drive. If they find the search history, we are both going to prison for life. She was talking to an accomplice. Who was it? Her father, a drug dealer, a lover. It didn't matter. I would find out. I need you to fix this, she begged. The old man knows something. The way he looks at me, he knows. We have to do something about him, before he talks. She hung up the phone and leaned her forehead against the cool glass of the window, sobbing quietly. She thought she was alone. She thought she was whispering into the void. I stepped out from the shadows. Rough night, Tiffany, I said, my voice booming in the quiet hallway. She spun around so fast she almost dropped her phone. She slammed her back against the window, her eyes wide with terror. Isaiah, she gasped. How long have you been there? Long enough, I said, walking slowly toward her. Long enough to know that you should really get a better data plan if you are going to plan murders over the phone. I didn't say that, she stammered, backing up until there was nowhere left to go. I was talking to my mother. I was telling her about the food poisoning. Save it, I said, stopping just inches from her. I leaned in close, invading her space, letting her smell the champagne still on my breath. The champagne she meant to be my last. I heard you, Tiffany. I heard every word. And tomorrow morning, when that toxicology report comes back, I am going to hand it to the detectives along with the little souvenir I took from Marcus's pocket. Her eyes dropped to my sleeve. She knew. You are going to burn, I whispered. You and whoever was on the other end of that line. I turned my back on her and started walking away. Where are you going? She cried out, her voice trembling. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I am going to get some coffee, I said. It is going to be a long night, and I want to be wide awake when they put the cuffs on you. I left her standing there, shivering in her ruined wedding dress, alone in the cold hospital light. I walked back toward the ICU, feeling the weight of the years dropping off my shoulders. They had tried to kill the old man, but they had woken up the warrior, and the warrior was just getting started. I walked out of the hospital into the cool pre-dawn air, leaving the sterile hum of machines and the stench of desperation behind me. My son was in a coma, clinging to life by a plastic tube. His wife was cornered like a rat in a trap. But I didn't feel relief. I felt a gnawing hunger for answers. I knew what they did. I knew how they did it. Now I needed to know why. I didn't go home. Instead, I drove my old Ford pickup truck toward the north suburbs, toward the gated community where I had bought Marcus a house 3 years ago. It was a sprawling brick colonial with manicured hedges and a 3-car garage. I paid cash for it. It was supposed to be his castle, his fresh start. I wanted him to have the stability I had to fight for. Now, as I pulled into the driveway under the yellow glow of the street lamps, it looked less like a home and more like a mausoleum. I had a key. Marcus had tried to ask for it back a dozen times, usually after Tiffany complained about boundaries, but I never gave it up. I told him that as long as my name was on the deed, I held a key. It was the contractor in me. You never walk away from a job site until you are sure the foundation is solid. And this foundation was cracking. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house smelled of expensive leather and stale potpourri. It was silent, too silent, the kind of silence that hides things. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't want the neighbors to see. I used the flashlight on my phone, cutting a beam through the darkness of the foyer. I walked past the living room filled with furniture that cost more than my first year's salary. White sofas, glass tables, things you couldn't touch, things you couldn't live on. It was all Tiffany. It was all a show. I headed straight for the study. It was a room Marcus liked to call his office, even though he didn't have a job. He played at being a businessman sitting behind a mahogany desk, making calls and pretending to move money around. I knew where the safe was. I installed it myself behind a false panel in the wainscoting. I taught Marcus the combination. It was his mother's birthday. He never had the imagination to change it. I knelt down my knees, protesting against the hardwood floor. I slid the panel back. The steel face of the safe glinted in the flashlight beam. I spun the dial. Right to 10, left to 24, right to 52. Click. The handle turned. The heavy door swung open with a smooth, well-oiled sigh. I expected to see cash. Marcus always liked to flash rolls of hundreds, acting like a big shot. I expected to see jewelry, maybe some of Tiffany's trinkets. But the safe was empty of treasure. Instead, it was stuffed with paper. Stacks and stacks of paper crammed in tight like insulation in a wall. I pulled out the first stack. My hand shook slightly, not from age but from a cold, rising dread. It was a letter from a casino in Gary, Indiana. A marker, $50,000 past due. I pulled out the next one. A collection notice from a private lending firm in Chicago, the kind that doesn't have a website, the kind that operates out of the back of a pawn shop. $100,000. Immediate payment required. I kept pulling them out. It was a graveyard of bad decisions. Sports betting slips, online poker debts, loans taken out against cars he didn't own. I did the math in my head, adding up the zeros. 500,000, 1 million, 1.5 million, $2 million. My son wasn't just broke. He was buried. He was drowning in an ocean of debt that no bridge loan could fix. He had gambled away everything I had given him, and then he had gambled away things he didn't even have. Then I found the deed. It was at the bottom of the stack, the deed to this house. The house I bought free and clear, the house that was supposed to be his safety net. Stapled to the front was a foreclosure notice. He had taken out a second mortgage, and a third. He had forged my signature on the title transfer, forged the notary seal, and leveraged the roof over his head to pay for one more spin of the wheel. The bank was coming for the house in 30 days. They were going to be homeless. I sat back on my heels, feeling the weight of the betrayal pressed down on my chest. He had lied to me every day for 3 years. Every time he smiled, every time he hugged me, he was hiding this. He was stealing the legacy I built for him and feeding it into a shredder. But why kill me? Why now? If he was broke, if he was losing the house, why murder his father? I wasn't rich enough to cover $2 million in debt, not liquid cash anyway. My money was tied up in trusts and equipment. Killing me wouldn't pay the sharks fast enough. Unless. I reached into the very back of the safe. My fingers brushed against a thick envelope made of heavy, expensive paper. It was distinct from the cheap collection notices. It felt official. I pulled it out. It was a policy document from a major insurance carrier. Life insurance. I opened it. The beam of my flashlight danced across the page, highlighting the numbers. Insured Isaiah Washington. Beneficiary Marcus Washington. Benefit amount $5 million. I stared at the number, 5 million. That was the magic number. That was the exit strategy. With $5 million, he could pay off the sharks, save the house, keep Tiffany and designer dresses, and still have enough left over to gamble until he died. I looked at the date. The policy had been taken out 6 months ago, but there was a clause. A waiting period. It had become active, fully vested and payable exactly 3 days ago. 3 days. They had waited. They had planned the wedding to coincide with the policy kicking in. The wedding wasn't a celebration, it was a stage. They needed a public place. They needed witnesses to see the loving son toasting his father. They needed an accident or a heart attack in front of a crowd so no one would ask questions. I turned to the last page, the signature line. There it was. Isaiah Washington, written in blue ink. It looked like my signature. The loops were right, the slant was right. But it wasn't mine. I knew my hand. I knew the way the pen dragged on the paper when my arthritis flared up. This signature was too smooth, too perfect. It was a tracing, or a practice job. And right below it, the witness signature, Tiffany St. James. She had witnessed the forgery. She was part of it from the very beginning. This wasn't just Marcus being desperate. This was a conspiracy. They had sat in this room probably laughing, drinking my wine, and practicing my signature until they got it right. They had put a price tag on my life, $5 million. That was what I was worth to them. Not a father, not a mentor, just a payday. I felt a cold calm settle over me. It was the same feeling I used to get before a big pour when the concrete trucks were lined up and the weather was turning bad. The panic was gone. The hurt was gone. Now there was only the job. I took out my phone. I didn't have much battery left, but I had enough. I started taking pictures. I photographed the gambling debts, every page, every threat, every dollar sign. I photographed the mortgage fraud, the foreclosure notice, the forged title transfer, and then I photographed the insurance policy. I took a close-up of the policy number. I took a close-up of the activation date, and I took a crystal-clear, high-definition picture of that fake signature. I was building a wall. Brick by brick, I was building a wall around them that they would never be able to climb over. I put the papers back. I stacked them exactly as I had found them, the gambling debts on top. The deed in the middle, the insurance policy in the back. I closed the safe door. I spun the dial, wiping my fingerprints off the steel with my handkerchief. I slid the wainscoting panel back into place. I stood up. My knees cracked loudly in the silent house. I looked around the office one last time. I looked at the picture on the desk. It was Marcus and me taken 10 years ago at his college graduation. I was smiling so wide my face hurt. He was looking at the camera with that same charming, empty smile he wore when he handed me the poisoned glass. I picked up the picture frame. For a second, I thought about smashing it. I thought about throwing it through the window and screaming my rage at the world. But I didn't. I set it back down gently. "Goodbye, son," I whispered. I walked out of the house, locking the door behind me. I walked to my truck, the gravel crunching under my boots. The sun was just starting to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and bruises. I had the evidence, I had the motive, I had the weapon. Now I needed to close the trap. I sat in the truck and looked at the picture of the insurance policy on my phone screen. $5 million. They wanted a payout. I was going to give them one. But it wasn't going to be the one they expected. I started the engine. The old Ford roared to life, reliable and strong, just like me. I pulled out of the driveway, leaving the house of lies behind. I wasn't going back to the hospital. Not yet. I had one more stop to make. If they wanted to play games with insurance and law, I needed to make sure I had the biggest shark in the tank on my side. I drove toward the city, my jaw set, my hands tight on the wheel. Marcus was in a coma, dreaming of millions. Tiffany was pacing a hospital hallway, spinning her webs. Let them dream, I thought. Let them spin. Because when the sun came up, I was going to bring the whole damn sky down on their heads. I drove back to the hospital as the sun was starting to burn off the morning mist. My eyes felt like they were filled with sand and my joints were stiff from climbing around on the floor of my son's study, but my mind was razor sharp. I had the evidence of the insurance fraud in my pocket, but I wasn't done collecting receipts. I walked through the automatic doors of the main entrance, and the first thing I saw was a parade of peacocks. Tiffany's parents had arrived. Preston and Beatrice St. James were standing in the middle of the lobby, looking like they had taken a wrong turn on their way to a country club. Preston was wearing a linen suit that probably cost more than my truck, and Beatrice was dripping in gold jewelry that I suspected was plated. They were loud, taking up space, demanding attention from the nurses and security guards. They weren't asking about Marcus. They weren't asking if their son-in-law was going to live or die. They were complaining about the coffee. I stopped for a moment, just watching them. I knew their type. I had dealt with men like Preston my whole life. They were the developers who tried to stiff me on contracts, the guys who smiled in your face while their hand was in your pocket. They thought because I wore work boots and spoke with a South Side cadence that I was slow. They thought I was just a wallet with legs. I walked up to them. My boots made a heavy thud on the tile floor, announcing my presence like a gavel hitting a bench. Preston turned around. He looked me up and down, his lip curling just slightly. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't offer a hug. "Isaiah," he said, his voice dripping with that fake upper crust accent that grated on my nerves. "About time you showed up. We have been waiting for an hour. This whole situation is simply unacceptable." "Is that right?" I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "My son is in a coma upstairs fighting for his life because someone poisoned him, and you are worried about the wait time." Preston waved his hand dismissively as if Marcus's condition was just a minor inconvenience like rain on a golf course. "Marcus will be fine. He is young," he said. "The boy has the constitution of an ox. But we have more pressing matters to discuss, Isaiah. Financial matters." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of heavy cream-colored paper. He thrust it toward me. "The hotel manager caught me as I was coming in," Preston said. "Apparently the final payment for the reception was due upon the conclusion of the event. Since the event concluded in such a dramatic fashion, the payment was not processed. They are holding the vendor payments. It is embarrassing, Isaiah. Truly embarrassing for a family of our standing to be chased for money." I looked at the paper. It was the invoice. $200,000. The balance due. "And what do you want me to do with this?" I asked, not taking the paper. "I want you to pay it," Preston snapped, shoving the paper against my chest. "It is your son's wedding. You are the father. It is your responsibility to make sure the St. James name isn't dragged through the mud because your boy couldn't handle his liquor, or whatever it was he took." I looked at Beatrice. She was examining her nails, looking bored. She chimed in without looking up. "Yes, Isaiah, please just write the check. We have friends who were at that reception. If word gets out that the bill wasn't paid, we will be ruined socially. Just pay the man so we can all go home and rest. This hospital air is terrible for my complexion." I laughed. It was a dry, harsh sound that made the security guard near the door look over. "You want me to pay $200,000 for a party where my son was poisoned?" I asked. "You want me to cover the tab for the stage where he almost died?" Preston stepped closer, trying to use his height to intimidate me. He didn't know I had stared down union bosses and mafia enforcers back in the 80s. He was a poodle barking at a pit bull. "Look here, Isaiah," he hissed. "I know you have money. Marcus told us about your business. He told us about your accounts. Don't play the poor old man with me. You are going to pay this bill because if you don't, I will make sure everyone in Chicago knows that Isaiah Washington is a deadbeat who lets his son's debts go unpaid." I reached into my own pocket. But I didn't pull out a checkbook. I pulled out a folded printout from my bank. I had stopped at the ATM on the way over and printed a transaction history. "You want to talk about debts?" "Preston," I said, unfolding the paper. "Let's talk about debts." I held the paper up to his face. "Do you see this transaction?" I asked, pointing to a line item dated 6 months ago. $50,000. Withdrawal. Preston squinted at it. So what he said. "You took out some cash. Good for you." "I didn't take it out," I said, my voice hardening. "Marcus did. He hacked my retirement account. He guessed the password. He transferred $50,000 out of the fund I spent 40 years building with my own sweat and blood." I looked Preston dead in the eye. "And do you know where that money went, Preston? Do you know what he used it for?" I didn't wait for an answer. "He used it for the deposit on the wedding venue," I said. "He used my stolen money to pay for the deposit that secured the room where you drank my champagne and ate my food. He stole from his father to impress you, to impress a man who doesn't have 2 nickels to rub together." Preston's face turned a shade of red that clashed with his suit. "How dare you?" he sputtered. "I am a man of means. You are a fraud." I cut him off, my voice rising just enough to draw a crowd. "I did my homework, Preston. Your house is in foreclosure. Your car dealership went bankrupt 3 years ago. You are living on credit and fumes. You pushed this wedding because you thought Marcus was going to bail you out. You thought once he got his hands on my money, he would pay off your debts too." Beatrice gasped, clutching her pearls. "Preston, do something. He is insulting us." "I am not insulting you," I said, stepping forward, forcing Preston to take a step back. "I am evicting you. I am evicting you from my life. I am evicting you from my son's life. And I am definitely not paying that bill." Preston tried to regain his composure. He straightened his jacket and tried to look dignified. "Fine," he said. "If you want to be petty about it, we will leave. We don't have to stand here and listen to the ravings of a senile old man. Come, Beatrice, we are leaving." He turned to walk away, heading toward the automatic doors. "One more thing, Preston," I called out. He stopped and turned around, looking annoyed. "What now, Isaiah?" "Nice car you drove here," I said. "I saw it in the valet line. A black Porsche Panamera, brand new." Preston smirked. Finally on ground he felt comfortable on. "Yes, well, we appreciate quality. It is a lease, of course, but only the best for the St. James family." "A lease," I repeated, nodding slowly. "A lease that requires a credit card on file for the security deposit and the monthly payments. A very specific credit card. A Platinum American Express." Preston's smirk faltered. "What is your point?" "My point," I said, taking a step closer, "is that Marcus didn't have a Platinum American Express. He couldn't get approved for a library card, let alone a Platinum card. So he used mine. He stole my card out of my wallet 6 months ago and gave it to you so you could rent a fancy car and pretend you were rich." The lobby was quiet now. Nurses stopped at the desk. Patients in wheelchairs stopped moving. Everyone was watching the showdown. "I called American Express 5 minutes ago," I said, my voice echoing off the high ceiling. "I reported the card stolen." I reported all unauthorized charges, including the recurring payment for a black Porsche Panamera registered to a Preston St. James. Preston's eyes went wide. He looked at the door. He looked at the valet stand outside. You canceled the card, he whispered. I did, I said. And when you cancel the card on a high-end rental and report it as fraud, the rental company gets very upset. They don't just send a letter, Preston. They call the police. As if on cue, the blue and red lights flashed through the glass doors of the hospital entrance. A police cruiser pulled up right behind the black Porsche that the valet had just pulled around. 2 officers stepped out. They weren't smiling. They walked up to the valet, took the keys, and then looked toward the hospital entrance. Preston started to back away. No, he muttered. No, this is a misunderstanding. Marcus said he would handle it. Marcus said it was a gift. It wasn't a gift, I said. It was theft. Grand larceny. And you are in possession of stolen property. The officers walked through the automatic doors. They scanned the lobby. I raised my hand and pointed a finger straight at Preston St. James. That is him, officers, I said. That is the man driving the vehicle obtained with the stolen credit card. Preston tried to run. It was a pathetic attempt. He spun around and tried to head for the elevators, maybe thinking he could hide on the upper floors. But he was slow and panicked. The officers caught him before he made it 10 feet. Sir, put your hands behind your back, the first officer said, grabbing Preston's arm. Get your hands off me, Preston shouted, struggling. Do you know who I am? I am Preston St. James. This is a mistake. That man is lying. Beatrice started screaming. It was a high-pitched wail that shattered the quiet of the hospital. Don't touch him, she yelled, hitting the officer with her purse. He has a heart condition. You can't do this. The second officer gently but firmly pushed her back. Ma'am, step back or you will be arrested for obstruction. I stood there and watched as they clicked the handcuffs onto Preston's wrists. The cold steel snapped shut with a sound that was music to my ears. They marched him out of the lobby, past the staring nurses, past the shocked patients, past me. Preston looked at me as he was dragged past. His face was a mask of pure hatred and fear. You will pay for this, Isaiah, he spat. You will pay. I already paid Preston, I said calmly. I paid $50,000. And now you are going to pay me back. With interest. Beatrice was sobbing on a bench, her fake gold jewelry clinking as she shook. She looked at me with venom in her eyes, but she didn't say a word. She knew she was next. She knew the ride was over. I turned away from them. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel guilt. I felt the satisfaction of a job well done. I had cleared the debris. Now I could get back to the real work. I walked back towards the elevators, heading up to the ICU. My son was still in a coma, but his co-conspirators were dropping like flies. One in handcuffs, one cornered in a hallway, and one lying in a hospital bed waiting for a reckoning. I pressed the button for the 4th floor. The doors slid shut, cutting off the sound of Beatrice's weeping. I took a deep breath. Half the team was gone. Now it was just me and Marcus. And I had a feeling our conversation when he woke up was going to be one for the history books. The hum of the ventilator had stopped, replaced by the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor, which sounded like a countdown clock in a bomb shelter. I stood just outside the glass door of the ICU room watching. I had been awake for 30 hours, but I didn't feel tired. I felt cold, a deep freezing cold that settled in my bones and made my hands steady. Inside the room, Marcus was waking up. It wasn't a peaceful waking. His body jerked. His eyes flew open wide and terrified, staring up at the acoustic ceiling tiles. He tried to sit up. He tried to rip the IVs out of his arm, but then he stopped. He froze. I watched his face contort in confusion and then horror. He was trying to move his left arm, but it lay there on the white sheet like a piece of dead wood. He tried to move his left leg, but it was heavy and unresponsive. The poison cocktail had done its work. It had shocked his system so hard it caused a temporary stroke. Half of his body was on strike. Tiffany was sitting in the chair next to the bed. She looked like a ghost in her ruined dress, her face scrubbed clean of makeup, her eyes red and swollen. She hadn't left his side, not out of love, but out of fear. She had nowhere else to go. Her parents were in custody. Her plan was in ashes. Marcus was her only card left to play. When she saw him move, she leaned in. She didn't hug him. She didn't kiss his forehead. She grabbed his working hand, the right one, and squeezed it hard. "Marcus," she whispered. "Marcus, can you hear me?" He turned his head toward her. The left side of his face was slack, drooping slightly. giving him a lopsided, grotesque expression. He tried to speak. His voice was a wet slur, a struggle of tongue against teeth. What happened? Tiffany glanced at the door. She looked right at me, but I was standing in the shadows of the hallway, leaning against the wall, my head bowed, looking at the floor. To her, I looked like a broken old man defeated by the night's events. I looked like I wasn't paying attention. She turned back to Marcus and lowered her voice to a harsh whisper. "You drank it, you idiot," she hissed. "You drank the toast." Marcus's eyes widened. The memory was coming back. The switch, the smile, the taste of the champagne. He tried to sit up again, but his left side anchored him down. Panic flared in his eyes. He looked at his arm, then back at Tiffany. "I can't move." He slurred, saliva gathering at the corner of his mouth. "It is a side effect," she said impatiently. "The doctor said it might be temporary." "Focus, Marcus. We have bigger problems." He looked at her confused. "Your father?" She whispered, venom in every syllable. "He is alive. He is fine. He is standing right outside." Marcus's working eye narrowed. The confusion vanished, replaced by a sharp, malignant clarity. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask why he had poisoned himself. He asked the only question that mattered to a man who had just bet his soul and lost. "How?" He wheezed, his voice barely audible even to me, standing 5 feet away with my hearing tuned like a radar dish. "How did he escape? How did he escape? Not 'I am glad he is safe,' not 'what have I done?' Just disappointment. Pure, unadulterated disappointment that his father was still breathing air." "I don't know," Tiffany whispered back. "Maybe the waiter moved the glasses. Maybe you messed up. It doesn't matter. He is alive and he has a power of attorney, and he ordered a toxicology screen." Marcus let out a low groan that sounded like a wounded animal. He closed his eyes tight. "We are dead," he mumbled. "No, we are not." Tiffany snapped. "Listen to me. He doesn't know. He thinks it is a mystery. He is old Marcus. He is in shock. He is walking around like a zombie. We can still salvage this. We just need to stick to the story. It was the food, or it was a mistake. We deny everything." I had heard enough. I knew his heart now. I knew there was no redemption in that hospital bed. There was only greed and rot. It was time for the performance of a lifetime. I took a deep breath, letting my shoulders slump. I loosened my tie until it hung crooked. I ruffled my gray hair, making myself look disheveled and wild. I let my mouth hang open slightly, a look of vacuous, senile confusion. I shuffled into the room. I dragged my feet, making a scuffing sound on the linoleum. "Marcus," I cried out, my voice trembling and cracking. "My boy, you are awake. Praise God." Tiffany jumped back, releasing his hand as if it were hot iron. She plastered a fake, concerned smile on her face, but her eyes were watching me like a hawk. Dad Marcus slurred, trying to lift his head. I rushed to the bedside. I didn't look at the monitors. I didn't look at his paralyzed arm. I looked into his eyes and I let tears well up in mine. Real tears, tears for the son I wished I had. "I thought I lost you," I sobbed, grabbing his good hand. I thought my heart was going to stop. "The doctors, they said poison. They said poison Marcus." I saw the flash of panic in their eyes. They were waiting for the accusation. They were waiting for the handcuffs. "Who would do this?" I wailed, clutching his hand to my chest. "Who would try to hurt my boy? It must have been an enemy. Someone from the old days. Someone trying to get to me through you." I saw their shoulders drop. Relief washed over them so thick I could smell it. They bought it. They thought I was blaming some imaginary gangster from my past. They thought I was too stupid to see the snake in the bed. Dad Marcus stammered, playing along. "I don't know. It happened so fast." "I know, son, I know," I interrupted him, patting his hand frantically. "But you are alive. That is all that matters. You are alive." I stood up, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. I started pacing the small room, muttering to myself, acting like the stress had finally snapped my mind. "I can't do this anymore," I muttered loud enough for them to hear. "I am too old. My heart, it can't take it. First the wedding, then this. I am tired. I am so tired." I stopped pacing and looked at them. I made my face look pleading, desperate. "Marcus," I said, leaning over the bed, "I made a decision. While you were sleeping, I was thinking, I was praying, and God told me it is time. Time for what Marcus asked. Time to let go, I said. I have been holding on too tight, holding on to the company, holding on to the money, thinking I needed to control everything. But look what happened. My holding on almost got you killed. Tiffany leaned forward. Her interest was piqued. The mention of money acted on her like a smelling salt. What do you mean, Isaiah? She asked softly. I mean, I am done, I said, throwing my hands up. I am retiring. Officially, effective immediately. I don't want the stress. I don't want the targets on my back. I looked at Marcus with a look of pure fatherly devotion. As soon as you are well enough to hold a pen, I said I am signing it all over to you. The construction firm, the real estate holdings, the accounts, everything. I want you to be the CEO. I want you to be the owner. I just want to go sit on a porch somewhere and fish. I want peace. The silence in the room was absolute. I could hear the gears turning in their heads. They had tried to kill me for $5 million. Now I was offering them a company worth $50 million. I was offering them the keys to the kingdom. But I continued rambling, selling the act. I will call the lawyers tomorrow. We will draw up the transfer papers. You just focus on getting better, son. You need to get your strength back so you can run the empire. I am going to make you the richest man in Chicago. Marcus stared at me. His mouth was slightly open. The greed in his eyes was naked and ugly. He wasn't thinking about his paralyzed leg anymore. He wasn't thinking about the police. He was thinking about the power. You really mean it, Dad? He asked, his voice trembling with anticipation. I swear it on your mother's grave, I said. I am too old to fight, Marcus. You won. You are the man of the house now. I patted his shoulder one last time. I am going to go talk to the nurse, I said. I need some aspirin. My head is spinning. I can't hear very well. There is a ringing in my ears. I think the shock. I tapped my ear, pretending to be deafened by the stress. You two talk, I said. Rest. We will sign the papers soon. Just get well. I shuffled out of the room, my head down, my posture broken. I walked into the hallway and let the door close behind me. I didn't leave. I stood right next to the door, pressing my ear against the crack. Inside there was silence for a moment. Then I heard Tiffany's voice. It wasn't scared anymore. It was excited. Did you hear him? She whispered. He is giving us everything. The whole company. I heard Marcus try to laugh, a wet gurgling sound. 50 million, he croaked. We don't need the insurance, Tiffany said. If he signs over the company, we don't need him dead. Not yet, anyway. Right, Marcus said. Wait. Let him sign. Then we put him in a home. We have to be careful, Tiffany added. We have to keep him happy. Keep him thinking he is saving you. We play the good children. We nurse him. And the moment that ink is dry. She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't have to. We won, Marcus said. I heard the sound of a kiss, a celebration. Outside in the hallway, I straightened my back. I fixed my tie. The frailty vanished. The confusion evaporated. I smiled. It was a cold, hard smile. They took the bait. They swallowed it hook, line, and sinker. They thought they had won. They thought I was a feeble old man handing over his life's work. They didn't realize that by keeping me alive to sign those papers, they were giving me exactly what I needed. Time. They needed me alive to get the company. That meant the attempts on my life would stop. That meant I was safe. And it meant I had time to prepare the next phase of their education. I walked down the hallway, my stride long and purposeful. I wasn't going to get aspirin. I was going to make a phone call to a lawyer, but not the one they thought. I was going to draft some papers, all right, but they weren't transfer papers. They were the blueprints for a prison, and my son and his wife were going to be the first inmates. I stopped at the elevator and looked back at the door to room 402. Enjoy the victory lap, son, I thought, because the race isn't over, and you are running on a broken leg. The door to the hospital room didn't just open, it slid back with a hiss like a snake uncoiling. I was sitting in the corner chair peeling an orange with a pocket knife I wasn't supposed to have in the ICU. Marcus was dozing or pretending to doze, his face still slack on the left side. Tiffany was standing by the window tapping on her phone with a manic intensity. Then the suit walked in. He was a tall man, probably in his late 30s, wearing a navy blue suit that cost more than a drywaller makes in a month. His hair was slicked back with enough gel to waterproof a basement, and he carried a leather briefcase that looked heavy. I knew his type immediately. He was a shark. Not the kind that swims in the ocean with power and majesty, but the kind that circles the shallow water, nipping at the heels of the wounded. Tiffany turned around and her face lit up with a relief that looked rehearsed. "Oh, thank God," she said, putting her phone away. "Dad, this is Julian. He is an old friend from law school. He heard about the accident and offered to help us with the administrative side of things." Julian stepped forward, extending a hand that was soft and manicured. "Mr. Washington," he said, his voice smooth like oil, "I am so sorry for this tragedy. Truly heartbreaking. But we are here to help. We want to make sure the hospital billing doesn't become a burden while you focus on your son's recovery." I looked at his hand, but I didn't shake it. I just nodded slowly, keeping my mouth slightly open, maintaining the mask of the confused old man. "Help," I repeated slowly. That is nice. The bills they are very high. I don't know where my checkbook is." Julian smiled. It was a predatory smile, all teeth and no warmth. "Don't worry about the checkbook right now, Mr. Washington," he said, setting his briefcase on the rolling table over Marcus's legs. "We just need to handle some liability waivers and insurance authorizations. Standard procedure for a case this complex. The hospital needs to know who is authorized to make financial decisions so they don't stop treatment." He clicked the briefcase open. Inside it wasn't a mess of papers. It was organized, precise. He pulled out a thick document stapled at the top. He flipped past the first few pages, which were filled with dense legal jargon, and pointed to a line at the bottom of the last page. A yellow sticky note with a bright red arrow said, "Sign here." "Just a few signatures," Julian said, uncapping a heavy fountain pen. "Right here, and initials on the bottom of page 4. I leaned forward, squinting my eyes as if I couldn't focus. I reached out a trembling hand and took the document. My eyes might be old, but they still work. I didn't look at the signature line. I looked at the header, "Last Will and Testament," and below that, in slightly smaller text, "Durable Power of Attorney Asset Transfer Authorization." This wasn't hospital paperwork. This was a complete surrender. This document would give Marcus immediate control over every asset I owned, my bank accounts, my properties, my company. And since Marcus was incapacitated, the secondary clause gave that control to his spouse, Tiffany. It was bold. It was desperate. They weren't waiting for me to sign the company over later. They wanted it now. They brought a lawyer into an ICU to trick a grieving father into signing away his life's work. I looked up at Julian. He was watching me closely, sweat beading on his upper lip. Tiffany was holding her breath, her knuckles white as she gripped the bed rail. Even Marcus had opened his eyes, watching me with a hunger that cut through his paralysis. It is hard to read," I mumbled, my voice shaking. "The letters, they are swimming. Just sign where the arrow is," Julian said, his voice tight with impatience. "It is just standard forms, Mr. Washington. We don't want the hospital to unplug the machines because of a paperwork error, do we?" That was low, threatening my son's life with a lie. I took the pen. It was heavy, cold metal. I held it awkwardly, letting it shake in my hand. I brought the tip down to the paper. Tiffany took a step forward, almost vibrating with anticipation. She was already spending the money in her head. She was already redecorating my house. I pressed the pen to the paper, but I didn't sign my name. I pushed down hard enough to snap the nib. Ink bled onto the page, a dark blue stain spreading like a bruise. Then I slashed. I drew a jagged, violent line diagonally across the page, tearing through the paper. I ripped through the arbitration clause. I ripped through the asset transfer section. I ripped through the beneficiary designation. The sound of the tearing paper was loud in the quiet room. Julian gasped, snatching the document away. "What are you doing? You ruined it." I dropped the broken pen on the floor. It clattered loudly. I sat back in my chair and the shaking in my hands stopped. I straightened my spine. I looked at Julian and then at Tiffany. The confusion was gone from my face. "I am not signing that," I said, my voice dropping to a low rumble, "because I don't need a will, and I definitely don't need a power of attorney for assets I don't have anymore." The room went dead silent. You could hear the air conditioner humming. "What do you mean?" Tiffany asked, her voice shrill. "What do you mean, assets you don't have?" I looked at Marcus. I wanted him to hear this. I wanted him to understand that his greed had been for nothing. I sold it, I said calmly. Tiffany blinked. Sold what? Washington Construction, I said. The equipment, the contracts, the land, the office building, everything. I sold it all. Julian looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. That is impossible, he sputtered. A sale like that, due diligence takes months. You can't just sell a company of that size in a day. I didn't sell it in a day, I lied, leaning back and crossing my arms. I finalized the deal last week, Tuesday, 3 days before the wedding. I have been negotiating for 6 months. I was going to announce it at the reception as a surprise. Before the tragedy. Marcus let out a strangled noise from the bed. His working hand clawed at the sheets. Sold, he croaked. Sold, I confirmed. Lock, stock, and barrel. Tiffany walked around the bed. She looked like she was going to hit me. Who did you sell it to? She demanded. And where is the money? $50 million doesn't just vanish, Isaiah. Where is the check? Is it in the bank? She was panicking. If I had cash, the power of attorney was still valuable. She just needed to get control of the bank account. I smiled. It was the smile of a man who has nothing left to lose. I didn't put it in the bank, I said. I didn't want the tax hit, and I didn't want the hassle. Then where is it? Julian asked, his legal composure cracking. I gave it away, I said. Tiffany screamed. What? I gave it away? I repeated, enjoying the look of absolute horror on her face. I donated the entire proceeds, every single cent, to who Marcus wheezed, his face turning purple. To the Chicago Animal Welfare Society, I said. And the rest to a foundation that builds tiny homes for stray cats. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the silence of 3 greedy hearts breaking at the same time. Cats, Tiffany whispered. You gave $50 million to cats. I shrugged. I like cats. They are honest. They don't pretend to love you just to get fed. And besides, I thought you two were doing so well. I looked at Marcus, my eyes wide with fake innocence. You told me business was booming, son. You told me you were making millions with your investments. You bought that big house. You drive that Porsche. I figured you didn't need my money. I figured I would do some good in the world before I died, since I have such a successful, rich son to take care of me in my old age. Marcus looked like he was having another stroke. His eyes were bulging. He knew the truth. He knew he was broke. He knew the house was in foreclosure. He knew the Porsche was stolen. He knew he was $2 million in debt to people who break legs for a living. And now he thought the safety net, the golden parachute, the entire reason he had tried to kill me was gone. Donated to stray cats. You old fool. Marcus sputtered, saliva flying from his lips. You ruined us. I stood up. I walked over to the bed and leaned down close to his face. I ruined you, I asked softly. I built an empire for you, Marcus. I gave you an education. I gave you a home. And you tried to poison me at a wedding I paid for. I stood up straight and looked at the lawyer. Get out of here, I said. Take your fake papers and your cheap suit and get out of my son's room. If I see you again, I will call the Bar Association and tell them you tried to coerce a signature from a man under duress. Julian didn't argue. He shoved the torn papers back into his briefcase. He looked at Tiffany with disgust, realizing his payday had just evaporated. He turned and walked out the door without a word. Tiffany sank into the chair. She looked defeated. She looked small. You are lying, she whispered. You didn't sell it. You are lying. Maybe I said picking up my orange peel, or maybe I am just a crazy old man who loves kittens. You really want to take that gamble, Tiffany? I walked to the door. I am going to get some air, I said. You two stay here and talk about your finances. I am sure you have a lot of planning to do now that you are on your own. I walked out of the room, leaving them in the ruins of their expectations. Of course I hadn't sold the company, not yet, and I certainly hadn't given the money to cats. But they didn't know that. All they knew was fear. And fear makes people make mistakes. They thought the money was gone. That meant the motive for killing me was gone. Why kill a broke old man? But it also meant the motive for keeping me alive was gone. They didn't need me to sign transfer papers anymore. Now they just hated me. I walked down the hall, pulling out my phone. I needed to call my real lawyer. I needed to move assets for real this time, and I needed to make sure that lie about the sale held up just long enough for them to hang themselves. I smiled as I pressed the elevator button, the look on Tiffany's face when I said cats. It was worth every penny of the inheritance they were never going to see. I sat in the corner booth of a diner 3 blocks from the hospital watching the steam rise off my black coffee. Across from me sat Ray. Ray wasn't a man you found in the yellow pages. He was an ex-cop who got kicked off the force for being too rough with the bad guys, which in my book made him exactly the kind of man I needed. He slid a manila envelope across the greasy table. He didn't say a word. He just tapped it with a finger stained yellow from nicotine. I opened it. Pictures. Lots of them. Tiffany meeting a man in a parking garage. Tiffany arguing with a landlord. Tiffany entering a clinic downtown. She is desperate. Ray rumbled, his voice sounding like gravel in a cement mixer. She is running out of cash fast. Her parents getting arrested spooked her, but she isn't running. She is digging in. She thinks she can still squeeze you. I nodded, looking at the photo of the clinic. It was a high-end place. Genetic testing, fertility. The kind of place rich people go when they want answers they can keep quiet. Why was she there, I asked. Ray shrugged. Could be anything. But she was in there for 2 hours. And she came out smiling. That is the scary part, Zeke. She walked in looking like a funeral, and walked out looking like she won the lottery. I paid Ray in cash and went back to the hospital. The pieces were moving on the board, and I needed to be in the room when the next play was made. When I walked into the ICU room, the atmosphere had changed. The despair I had left them in earlier, the crushing weight of the fake news about me donating my fortune to cats, seemed to have lifted just a fraction. Tiffany was pacing again, but there was a new energy to it. A nervous, excited energy. Marcus was awake, staring at the ceiling. He looked miserable, but when I walked in, his eyes snapped to me. There was a glint there, a hope I didn't like. Dad, he croaked. Tiffany. She has news. I closed the door and leaned against it, acting the part of the tired, defeated old man. What news, I asked. Did you find a job, Tiffany? Because those hospital bills are going to start piling up. Tiffany stopped pacing. She smoothed her dress over her stomach. It was a gesture so calculated, so theatrical, it made my stomach turn. She looked at me with wide, teary eyes. Isaiah, she said, her voice trembling with fake emotion. I know things are bad. I know you are angry, and I know you gave the money away, but you have to fix it. You have to get it back. I shook my head. It is done, Tiffany. The cats need homes. No, she practically shouted, stepping toward me. You have to undo it. You have to find a way. Because this isn't just about us anymore. It isn't just about Marcus. She placed both hands on her belly and took a deep breath. I am pregnant, she whispered. I let the silence hang in the room. I looked at her stomach, then at her face. She was good. She really was. She had the glowing, expectant mother act down pat. Pregnant, I repeated, keeping my face blank. Yes, she said, a tear sliding down her cheek. I found out a few days before the wedding. I wanted to surprise Marcus on the honeymoon. It is a boy, Isaiah. We are pretty sure. A grandson. Your legacy. The next, Washington. She walked over to the bed and took Marcus's hand. He looked at her with a pathetic adoration. He believed her. Or maybe he just wanted to believe that he had fathered a son who would inherit a kingdom. You can't let your grandson grow up poor, Isaiah, she pleaded. You can't let the Washington line end in bankruptcy. You have to call the lawyers. You have to stop the donation, for him, for the baby. It was a hell of a play, the ultimate guilt trip, the biological imperative. She knew I was a man who valued family above all else. She knew I had built my company for my descendants. She was betting everything on the idea that I would burn the world down to protect my bloodline. I looked at her and forced a smile onto my face. It felt like cracking dried mud. A grandson. I said, my voice softening. A little baby. Yes, Dad, Marcus rasped. A son. Well, I said, walking over to the chair and sitting down heavily. That changes things. That certainly changes things. A child shouldn't suffer for the sins of his parents. Tiffany exhaled a long, shuddering breath. She thought she had me. She thought the checkbook was opening back up. I need to think, I said, rubbing my forehead. I need to make some calls. If I'm going to reverse this donation, it is going to take legal maneuvering, expensive maneuvering. I will do anything, Tiffany said instantly. Just tell us what you need. I need coffee, I said. And I need a sandwich. My sugar is low. Tiffany, could you go down to the cafeteria? Get me a turkey sandwich, no mayo, and a black coffee. She hesitated. She didn't want to leave the room. She didn't want to leave me alone with Marcus. But she also didn't want to annoy the man who was about to make her rich again. "Of course," she said, grabbing her purse. "I will be right back." "Leave the bag," I said, pointing to the oversized designer tote she had slung over her shoulder. "You don't want to lug that heavy thing all the way downstairs. You are pregnant. You need to be careful." It was a test. If she took the bag, she was hiding something. If she left it, she was confident. She paused, her hand tightening on the strap. Then she forced a smile. "You are right," she said. "You are so thoughtful, Isaiah." She dropped the bag onto the visitor chair in the corner. It landed with a heavy thud. "I will be back in 10 minutes, she said. "Don't go anywhere." As soon as the door clicked shut, I was up. I moved with a speed that would have shocked Marcus if he could have turned his head fast enough. "Dad." "What are you doing?" he slurred, watching me cross the room. "Just checking my phone, son," I said, standing between him and the chair, blocking his view with my body. I reached into the bag. It was a mess inside. Makeup, mints, a wallet, a backup phone, and a thick white envelope folded in half and stuffed into the side pocket. The same kind of envelope Ray had shown me in the pictures. The logo on the corner was from the clinic downtown. Precision Genetics. I pulled it out. My heart was hammering against my ribs. This was it. The truth. I opened the envelope. It wasn't just a pregnancy confirmation. It was a non-invasive prenatal paternity test. The kind you get when you need to know who the father is before the baby is born. The kind that costs $2,000 cash. I scanned the document. My eyes skipped over the medical jargon and landed on the results table. Subject A, Marcus Washington. Sample provided via hair follicle. I looked at Marcus. She must have plucked a hair from his head while he was sleeping or taken it from his hairbrush at home. She had been planning this. Probability of paternity 0%. Excluded. I felt a cold rage settle in my gut. He wasn't the father, I knew it. But seeing it in black and white was different. It was final. Then I looked at Subject B. She had tested 2 samples. She wanted to be sure. She needed to know which horse to bet on. Subject B, Julian Thorne. Julian. The lawyer. The shark in the cheap suit who had tried to force me to sign the will an hour ago. The man who had walked out of this room when he thought the money was gone. Probability of paternity 99.9%. I almost laughed. It was perfect. It was absolutely perfect. She was sleeping with the lawyer. They were partners in every sense of the word. They plotted to kill me, they plotted to steal the company, and they made a backup plan in case the poison didn't work. A baby, a fake heir. I quickly snapped a photo of the document with my phone, making sure the names and the percentages were clear. Then I folded the paper and stuffed it back into the envelope exactly how I found it. I shoved it back into the side pocket of her bag. I wasn't done. I walked over to the bed. Marcus was watching me, his eyes groggy. "Dad, are you okay?" he asked. "I am fine, son," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I just wanted to fix your pillow. You look uncomfortable." I reached behind his head. My hand brushed against the nape of his neck. I found a loose hair on the pillowcase. A thick black hair with the root still attached. I palmed it. Then for good measure, I plucked one right from his scalp. "Ow," he complained. "What was that?" "Just a tag on the pillowcase," I lied. "Sorry, son." I put the hairs into my pocket, wrapping them carefully in a tissue. Why did I take them? Because a photo of a document isn't enough. Not in court. Not when you are destroying someone's life. I needed to run my own test. I needed to be able to stand in front of a judge and say, "I verified this myself." I wasn't going to rely on Tiffany's paperwork. I was going to nail the coffin shut with my own hammer. I sat back down in the chair just as the door opened. Tiffany walked in, holding a paper cup and a sandwich. She looked flushed, happy. She thought she had pulled it off. "Here you go, Isaiah," she said, handing me the coffee. "Just the way you like it." I took the cup. I looked at her. I looked at her stomach where my supposed grandson was growing. A baby that belonged to a snake in a suit. "Thank you, Tiffany," I said, taking a sip. "You are a good girl, taking care of family like this." She beamed. "We have to stick together," she said, "especially now, with the baby coming." "Yes," I said, looking at Marcus, who was smiling that dumb, hopeful smile. The baby. The future. I took a bite of the sandwich. It tasted like cardboard, but I chewed it slowly. "I have been thinking," I said, wiping crumbs from my mouth. "If I'm going to undo this donation, I need to go home. I need to get my records. I need to access my private files." "I can go with you," Tiffany offered quickly. "I can drive you." "No," I said, holding up a hand. "You stay here. Marcus needs you, and you need to rest. For the baby." I will call a cab. I will go home, get the paperwork, and call the lawyers in the morning. We will fix this. Really? Marcus asked, tears welling in his eyes. You will save the company. I will do what is right, I said, standing up. I will do exactly what needs to be done to protect this family's legacy. Tiffany hugged me. It was like being hugged by a mannequin. Cold, hard, fake. Thank you, Dad, she whispered. You won't regret this. Oh, I knew I wouldn't. I walked out of the room, clutching the tissue with Marcus's hair in my pocket like it was a diamond. I had the truth. I had the leverage. And now I had the ultimate weapon. They wanted a legacy. I was going to give them one. But it wasn't going to be a construction empire. It was going to be a prison cell. I walked to the elevator, my steps light. I pulled out my phone and dialed Ray. Ray, I said when he picked up, I need you to run a DNA test. Rush order, and find out everything you can about a lawyer named Julian Thorne. I think he's about to become a very important part of this family reunion. I stepped into the elevator and watched the doors close on the 4th floor. Checkmate, I whispered. It was 3 in the morning when the wolves finally came to the door. The hospital was quiet, settled into that deep hum of machinery and distant footsteps that usually signals the graveyard shift. But I was wide awake. I was sitting in the corner chair watching the rise and fall of Marcus's chest, counting his breaths like I used to count inventory on a job site. Tiffany was asleep in the recliner, curled up under a thin hospital blanket, her mouth slightly open, drooling onto the vinyl cushion. She thought the storm had passed. She thought because I had gone home and come back with a promise to fix things that she was safe. She was wrong. The door didn't slide open this time. It was pushed hard enough to bounce off the rubber stopper on the wall. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. Tiffany bolted upright, gasping, clutching her chest. Marcus's eyes flew open wide and fearful. 2 men walked in. They weren't doctors, they weren't lawyers, and they certainly weren't family. They were big, wide men wearing leather jackets that creaked when they moved. They smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cold winter air. They didn't look at me. They didn't look at Tiffany. They looked straight at Marcus. The one in front was a giant, a wall of muscle with a scar running through his left eyebrow and a diamond stud in his ear that caught the light from the hallway. I knew his type. I had hired men like him for security back in the 80s, and I had fired men like him when they got too rough. He was an enforcer, a collector, a man who turned debts into bruises. Well, 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 the big man said, his voice a deep rumble that vibrated the plastic water pitcher on the tray table. Look at this. Sleeping Beauty is awake. Marcus tried to shrink back into his pillows, but his paralyzed side wouldn't cooperate. He looked like a broken doll. Big T, he stammered, his voice shaking. I was going to call you. I swear. Big T laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was the sound of a car crusher starting up. You were going to call me, he mocked, stepping closer to the bed. When were you going to call? After the wedding? After the honeymoon? Or were you going to wait until we came to your house and broke your wife's legs? Tiffany let out a small, terrified squeak. She pulled her knees up to her chest, trying to make herself small, trying to disappear into the ugly recliner. We heard you had a little accident, Big T said, leaning over the bed rail. We heard you took a nap. That is unfortunate, Marcus. Truly. But bad health doesn't pause the interest rate. You know the rules. 2 million. Due yesterday. 2 million, Tiffany whispered. Her eyes darted from the thug to Marcus. You told me it was 50,000. You told me you handled it. Marcus didn't look at her. He was staring at Big T's hands, which were resting on the bed rail. They were the size of hams, and the knuckles were scarred. I don't have it right now, Marcus wheezed. But I have a plan. My dad. He is going to sign over the company. I will have the money next week. I swear. Next week. Big T shook his head slowly. Next week isn't today, he said. And my boss, he doesn't like waiting. He gets anxious. And when he gets anxious, I have to break things to calm him down. He reached out and grabbed Marcus's paralyzed arm. He squeezed. Not hard enough to break it yet, but hard enough to show he could. Marcus screamed a high-pitched sound of pure terror. Stop, Tiffany yelled, jumping up. Stop it, you are hurting him. Big T turned his head slowly to look at her. He smiled, showing a gold tooth. And who are you? He asked. The blushing bride. Pretty dress. Be a shame if something happened to that pretty face. He let go of Marcus and took a step toward Tiffany. She scrambled back, knocking over the tray table. Water splashed everywhere. Don't touch me, she shrieked. Get away from me!
Pay up, Big T said, his voice dropping to a growl. Or we start taking payment in trade, starting with the wife. Tiffany panicked. The survival instinct that had driven her to plot my murder kicked in again, but this time it wasn't cold and calculated.
It was frantic. It was the reaction of a cornered animal throwing its young to the predator. She pointed a shaking finger at me. Him, she screamed. Ask him. That is his father, Isaiah Washington. He is rich. He has millions. He is right there. Ask him. She sold me out. Without a second of hesitation, she pointed the wolves at the old man sitting quietly in the corner. She thought I was feeble. She thought I was senile. She thought I was just a walking checkbook she could throw at her problems. Big T turned. He looked at me for the first time. He saw an old black man in a wrinkled tuxedo sitting with slumped shoulders and a cane resting against his knee. He saw a victim. Well, hello, Pops, Big T said, grinning. I didn't see you there in the dark. Your daughter-in-law says you got deep pockets. Is that true? I didn't move. I didn't shake. I just looked at him. You want to help your boy out? Big T asked, stepping toward me. You want to pay his tab so he can keep walking. Or are we going to have to teach the whole family a lesson? He reached out to grab my lapel. He wanted to intimidate me. He wanted to see the fear in my eyes. That was his mistake. Before his hand could touch my jacket, I moved. I didn't move like a 72-year-old man. I moved like the man who survived the Chicago race riots, who built skyscrapers in freezing winds, who stared down union busters with baseball bats in the 70s. I stood up. I didn't use the cane. I stood up straight, my full 6'2" frame unfolding like a switchblade. I slapped his hand away. It was a sharp, loud crack that echoed in the room. Don't you put your hands on me, son, I said. My voice wasn't frail anymore. It was deep. It was resonant. It was the voice of authority that commanded respect on every job site from the South Side to the Loop. Big T blinked. He pulled his hand back, surprised. He wasn't used to old men hitting back. Who do you think you are talking to, old man? He growled, stepping closer, trying to regain the dominance. I am talking to a punk who thinks leather and muscle make him a man, I said, stepping right into his space, looking him dead in the eye. I was dealing with your bosses when you were still wiping milk off your lip. Who sent you? Was it Sal or was it King David? Big T froze. Those names weren't public knowledge. Those were the old guard, the original shot callers of the neighborhood. I don't know who you are, Big T said, his voice losing a fraction of its edge. But you better sit down before I interrupted. Before you make a mistake you can't walk away from. Look at me. Look at my hands. I held up my hands. They were scarred, calloused, thick with a lifetime of work. These hands built the building your boss operates out of, I said, my voice low and dangerous. I poured the foundation for the Blue Note Club back in '82. I know how the game is played, son. And I know you don't break legs in an ICU unless you are stupid or desperate. Which one are you? The second thug, the quiet one by the door, spoke up. He looks familiar. T. I think that is Zeke. Zeke Washington, the contractor. Big T's eyes widened slightly. The name Zeke meant something in this town. It meant respect. It meant a man who paid his debts and expected others to do the same. You are Zeke, he asked. I am, I said. And that pathetic excuse for a man in that bed is my son. Unfortunately. I looked at Marcus, who was staring at me with his mouth open. He had never seen this side of me. He had only seen the provider, the gentle father. He didn't know the fighter. He owes you $2 million, I stated. It wasn't a question. Yeah, Big T said, straightening his jacket, showing a little more respect. Principal and interest. He is in deep, Mr. Washington. He is broke, I said flatly. The house is in foreclosure. The cars are leased or stolen. He doesn't have 2 dimes to rub together. You can break every bone in his body and you still won't get paid. You know that. Big T scowled. Then we take it out in flesh. It is the principal. Principal doesn't pay the rent, I said. Cash does. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my checkbook. Not the personal one, the business one. The one tied to the operating account of Washington Construction. I will pay it, I said. Tiffany let out a sob of relief. Oh, thank God. Thank you, Isaiah. Shut up, I snapped without looking at her. I am not doing this for you. I turned back to Big T. I will pay it, I repeated. But not $2 million. That is fantasy money. That is juice on top of juice. I will give you 1 million. Cash. Wire transfer. Tonight. 1 million. Big T laughed. That is half. My boss won't go for that. Your boss will take it and say thank you, I said, my voice hard as granite. Because 1 million is better than 0. And if you touch him, if you touch either of them, you get 0. Because I will spend that million hiring every off-duty cop in this city to hunt you down. Do we have a deal? Big T hesitated. He looked at his partner. He looked at Marcus shaking in the bed. He did the math. 1 million guaranteed cash versus a beatdown that paid nothing. I need to make a call, he grunted. Make it, I said. He stepped into the hallway. I stood there staring at the second thug, daring him to move. Tiffany tried to speak, but I held up a hand, silencing her. Marcus was crying silent tears of shame and relief. Big T came back 2 minutes later. 1.2, he said. And we walk away. The debt is cleared. 1 million, I said, not blinking. Take it or leave it. And I want the paper. I want the promissory note. I want every IOU he signed. I want the debt assigned to me, legally. Assigned to you? Big T asked, confused. Why? Because if I pay for it, I own it, I said. That is how business works. Big T shrugged. He didn't care about the paperwork. He just wanted the money. Fine, he said. 1 million. You wire it to the account I give you. We give you the paper. I pulled out my phone. I called my banker. It was 4 a.m, but when you keep 7 figures in an account, your banker picks up. Transfer $1 million, I said, giving the account number. Big T read off his phone. Authorization code Zulu Tango 9er. Yes, immediate. I hung up. It is done, I said. Big T checked his phone. A minute passed. Then it pinged. He looked at the screen and grinned. Pleasure doing business with you, Zeke, he said. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a thick envelope stained with sweat and grease. He tossed it onto the bed next to Marcus's leg. There is your paper, he said. He is your problem now. Big T looked at Marcus one last time. You got lucky, kid, he said. Your daddy is a serious man. Try not to waste his money this time. The two men turned and walked out of the room, leaving a silence so heavy it felt like it would crush us. Tiffany slumped against the wall, sliding down to the floor. She was laughing and crying at the same time. You saved us, she gasped. You saved us, Isaiah. I knew you would. I knew you wouldn't let them hurt us. Marcus looked at me, his eyes filled with a pathetic gratitude. Dad, he whispered, thank you. I swear I will pay you back, once the company is mine, once I am back on my feet. I walked over to the bed. I didn't look at Marcus. I looked at the envelope. I picked it up. I opened it and checked the contents. The markers, the IOUs, the signed confessions of debt. It was all there. $2 million worth of leverage. I closed the envelope and tucked it into my inside pocket right next to the packet of poison. I turned to look at them. I let the Zeke mask slip just a little bit. I let them see the cold calculation in my eyes. Who said I saved you? I asked softly. Tiffany's smile faltered. What do you mean? You paid them. They are gone. Yes, I paid them, I said, which means they aren't your creditors anymore. I patted the pocket where the debt lay heavy against my chest. I am, I whispered. Marcus looked confused. Dad, but you are my dad. You forgave the debt, right? It is family. I looked at him. I looked at the son who had tried to kill me. The son who had stolen from me. The son who was now legally, financially, and morally owned by me. We will talk about the terms later. I said, my voice devoid of warmth. Right now you need to rest. You have a big day tomorrow. What happens tomorrow? Tiffany asked warily, sensing the shift in the air. Tomorrow, I said, walking to the door. Tomorrow we start the transfer, just like we discussed. I walked out of the room, leaving them in the dark. They thought they were free. They thought the monster was gone. They didn't realize the monster was still in the room. He just happened to be wearing their father's face. I walked down the hallway, feeling the weight of the debt in my pocket. $1 million. 1 million. It was a lot of money, but for what I was about to do, it was a bargain. I had just bought the right to destroy them, and I was going to get my money's worth. The ride from the hospital to the gated community in North Barrington was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of a held breath before the levee breaks. I drove my truck following the medical transport van that carried Marcus. Tiffany rode with him, probably whispering more lies into his ear, probably telling him that once they got inside the gates, they would be safe. She thought the house was her fortress. She thought that 4 walls and a security system could keep out the consequences of what they had done. She didn't realize that the man holding the keys to the kingdom was driving the rusted Ford F-150 in her rearview mirror. When we pulled into the driveway, the afternoon sun was hitting the windows of the mansion, making them gleam like gold. It was a beautiful house. 5 bedrooms, 4 baths, a 3-car garage, and a manicured lawn that cost more to maintain than most people earned in a year. I had bought it with cash 3 years ago. I had put it in Marcus's name because I wanted him to have an asset. I wanted him to have equity. Instead, he had treated it like an ATM machine, extracting every ounce of value until it was just a hollow shell owned by criminals. The transport guys wheeled Marcus up the front walk. He looked pathetic, slumped in the wheelchair, his left arm strapped across his chest, his face pale and slack. Tiffany walked beside him, her head held high, acting the part of the lady of the manor returning to her estate. She unlocked the front door and ushered the medics inside. I followed, my heavy work boots thudding against the imported Italian tile of the foyer. Once Marcus was settled in the living room and the medics had left, Tiffany turned to me. Her demeanor changed instantly. The fear she had shown in the hospital was gone, replaced by a sneering arrogance. She was on her turf now. She felt powerful. "Okay, Isaiah," she said, crossing her arms over her chest. "Marcus is home. He is safe. We have a lot of healing to do, and frankly, we need our privacy." I stood in the center of the foyer, looking up at the chandelier. It was dusty. They hadn't cleaned it in months. "Privacy," I repeated calmly. "Yes, privacy," she snapped. "The doctor said he needs rest. He doesn't need his father hovering over him, reminding him of everything that went wrong. You have done enough, Isaiah. You paid the debt and we appreciate it. But now it is time for you to go. We will call you when we are ready to sign the company transfer papers." She was dismissing me. Like I was the help. Like I was a gardener she had just finished paying. She actually thought I was going to walk out the door, get in my truck, and wait by the phone for them to summon me to sign away my life's work. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. "I am not going anywhere, Tiffany," I said. "But you are." She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Excuse me. This is my house. My name is on the deed right next to Marcus's. You are trespassing. Get out before I call security." I pulled out the thick envelope I had taken from Big T the night before. I pulled out the stack of documents, the promissory notes, the loan agreements, and the collateral assignment. "Your name is on the deed," I said, unfolding the paper. "That is true. But you see, Tiffany, when you borrow $2 million from loan sharks, you have to give them something to hold on to. Something valuable." Marcus groaned from his wheelchair. His good eye went wide. He knew. He remembered what he had signed in the back room of a shady club 3 months ago. "No," he slurred. "Dad, no." I ignored him. I held the document up for Tiffany to see. "This is a deed of trust," I explained, my voice steady and cold. "Signed by Marcus Washington and Tiffany St. James. It pledges this property at 1402 Oak Ridge Drive as collateral for the loan of $2 million. It has a default clause, Tiffany. A very specific, strict default clause." I took a step toward her. She backed away, her eyes locked on the paper. "It says that upon default of payment, the lender has the right to immediate possession," I read. "No court hearing, no eviction notice. Immediate possession. The house becomes the property of the debt holder." Tiffany shook her head. But you paid the debt. You paid them. That means the debt is gone." I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "I didn't pay the debt for you," I said. "I bought the debt. I bought the paper. I am the lender now, Tiffany. I am the bank, and I am calling the loan." I dropped the papers onto the glass coffee table. They landed with a heavy slap. "You are in default," I said, "and I am exercising my right to immediate possession. This is my house, not yours. Mine. And I want you out." Tiffany stared at me. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. "You can't do this," she screamed. "We have rights, squatters' rights, tenants' rights. You can't just throw us out on the street. Marcus is sick. He is crippled. He should have thought about that before he tried to kill his landlord," I said. I turned and walked to the front door. I opened it wide. I didn't come alone, I said. I put 2 fingers to my lips and let out a whistle. It was a loud, piercing sound, the kind I used to use to signal the crane operators over the roar of diesel engines. At the bottom of the driveway, 3 large box trucks roared to life. They had been waiting just out of sight. They rumbled up the driveway, their engines growling. They weren't moving vans. They were heavy-duty construction trucks, Washington construction trucks. They screeched to a halt on the pristine lawn, tearing up the grass with their massive tires. The doors opened, and out jumped my crew. 15 men. Men I had worked with for decades. Big Mike, Sal, Tiny. Men who had calluses on their hands and loyalty in their blood. They weren't wearing uniforms. They were wearing work clothes. And they weren't smiling. They marched up the front steps like an army. They filled the foyer, bringing the smell of sawdust and sweat into the sterile mansion. Isaiah Big Mike grunted, nodding at me. He looked at Tiffany and Marcus with pure disgust. He knew what they had done. I had told my crew everything. Clean it out, I ordered. Every room, every closet, every drawer. If it belongs to them, put it on the curb. If it belongs to the house, leave it. You can't, Tiffany shrieked, rushing at Big Mike, trying to block his path. This is illegal. I will call the police. Big Mike didn't even slow down. He just walked past her like she was a ghost. Call them, I said to her back. Show them the deed. Show them the loan documents where you agreed to these terms. Go ahead. But while you are dialing, my men are working, and they work fast. The crew spread out through the house like a swarm of locusts. I heard the sound of drawers being ripped open. I heard the sound of clothes being pulled off hangers. Upstairs, I heard the heavy thud of furniture being moved. Tiffany ran to Marcus, grabbing his wheelchair. Marcus, do something, she yelled, shaking him. He is destroying our life. Marcus looked at me. Tears were streaming down his face. Dad, please, he begged, his speech slurred and pathetic. I have nowhere to go. I can't walk. I looked at him. I remembered him slipping the powder into my drink. I remembered him toasting to my death. You have a Porsche, I said coldly. Oh wait, no you don't. The police took that. Well, I guess you can call an Uber. Tiny came down the stairs carrying an armful of Tiffany's designer dresses. He didn't fold them. He didn't put them in boxes. He walked out the front door and dumped them in a pile on the front lawn right on top of the sprinkler head. My Dior, Tiffany screamed, running after him. You animal, that is silk. More men came down, shoes, handbags, suits, electronics, it all went out the door. It wasn't being stolen, it was being evicted. I walked into the living room and sat down on one of the white sofas. I watched as Sal disconnected the massive flat-screen TV from the wall. He carried it out, tucking it under his arm like a notebook. Where are you taking that? Tiffany yelled, following him. Curb, Sal grunted. Within 20 minutes, the house was being stripped. The neighbors were starting to come out. They stood at the edge of their driveways watching the spectacle. The rich elite of North Barrington watching the Washingtons air their dirty laundry literally on the lawn. Tiffany was running back and forth trying to save her things, trying to drag bags back inside, but the crew just blocked her. They were a wall of muscle and indifference. Finally, she ran back to me. She fell to her knees in front of the sofa. Isaiah, please, she sobbed. I am pregnant. You can't do this to a pregnant woman. You can't do this to your grandchild. I looked at her stomach. The fake vessel for the fake air. My grandchild, I asked, raising an eyebrow. Are you sure about that, Tiffany? She froze. Her eyes darted side to side. Of course, she stammered. Who else would it be? I leaned forward. I don't know, I whispered. Why don't we ask Julian? Her face went white, whiter than the sofa. She stopped crying instantly. The shock dried her tears. You know, she whispered. I know, I said. I know about the test. I know about the lawyer. I know everything. So don't you dare use that baby as a shield. That baby is innocent, but it isn't a Washington, and it isn't staying in my house. She stood up slowly. The fight drained out of her. She looked at Marcus, who was sobbing in his wheelchair, unaware that his wife was carrying another man's child. She looked at the pile of her life accumulating on the grass. You are a monster, she hissed. I stood up. No, Tiffany, I said. I am a contractor. I clear the site before I build, and this site is condemned. I turned to Big Mike, who was waiting for orders. Get him out, I said, pointing to Marcus. Big Mike walked over to the wheelchair. He unlocked the brakes. Dad, Marcus wailed. Dad, please! Big Mike wheeled him to the door. He pushed him over the threshold. He pushed him down the ramp, and he left him sitting on the driveway next to a pile of dirty laundry. Tiffany followed, grabbing her purse, clutching it like a lifeline. She walked out the door, stepping over her own clothes. I walked to the doorway. I stood there, framed by the grand entrance of the house I had bought with my hard work. Change the locks, I told Sal, and put a chain on the gate. Nobody gets in without my say-so. I watched them. Marcus sitting in the wheelchair, unable to move half his body, weeping into his hands. Tiffany standing amidst the wreckage of her materialism, frantically dialing her phone, probably calling Julian, who wouldn't answer. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the eviction. It was a brutal scene. It was ugly. But it was necessary. I had taken their shelter, I had taken their pride, I had taken their lies and thrown them out on the lawn for the world to see. I closed the heavy oak door, shutting out their cries. The silence of the house wrapped around me. It was empty now, but it was clean. I took a deep breath. Phase 1 of the punishment was complete. They were homeless, they were broke, and they were turning on each other. But I wasn't done, not by a long shot. I still had the insurance fraud evidence, I still had the toxicology report, and I still had a score to settle for the poison in my veins. I walked to the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water. Tap water. It tasted better than any champagne I had ever had. I sat in my office at the construction yard, watching the world turn against me on a 24-inch monitor. It had been 48 hours since I evicted my son and his wife. They hadn't wasted a minute. They were holed up in a cheap motel by the airport, the kind of place where the sheets are thin and the walls are thinner, but they had turned their dingy room into a broadcast studio. Tiffany had gone live on social media. She was sitting on the edge of a stained mattress, wearing one of the few dresses she had managed to salvage, looking disheveled and broken. Beside her, Marcus sat in his wheelchair, his paralyzed arm propped up on a pillow, looking like a martyr. "He threw us out," Tiffany sobbed into the camera, tears streaming down her face. "My husband is disabled. He can't walk. He can't feed himself. And his own father, a multimillionaire, dragged him out of his home and left him on the curb like trash. He stole the deed. He stole our money. He is a monster." The video had 2 million views. The comments were a river of hate. People I had never met were calling for my head. They wanted to boycott my company. They wanted to burn down my office. They called me a tyrant, an abuser, a heartless old man who hated his own flesh and blood. Local news vans were already parked outside the chain-link fence of my yard, cameras pointed at my window waiting for the villain to emerge. My foreman, Big Mike, stood by the door looking worried. "Isaiah," he said, "ideally we should issue a statement, maybe apologize, smooth this over before we lose contracts." I swiveled my chair around. "Apologize?" I asked, my voice low. "For what, Mike?" "For not letting them kill me." Mike looked down. "They don't know that, boss. All they see is a crippled kid and a crying pregnant wife. Perception is reality." "Not today," I said, standing up. "Today, reality is reality." I picked up the phone and dialed the number for the biggest news station in Chicago, the one that had been running the story nonstop since morning. "This is Isaiah Washington," I said when the producer answered. "You want a statement. You want the truth. Come to the yard. Noon. And bring a projector. I have a movie I want to show you." At 12 o'clock sharp, I walked out of the office building. I had set up a podium in front of a stack of concrete pipes. It wasn't a polished boardroom. It was a work site. Dust in the air, the smell of diesel, real life. There were 50 reporters there, microphones jammed together, cameras rolling. They looked angry. They were ready to tear me apart. They wanted to know why I hated my son. They wanted to know how I slept at night. "Mr. Washington," one reporter shouted, "is it true you forged the deed to your son's house?" "Mr. Washington," another yelled, "why did you cut off financial support to a disabled man?" I raised my hands. My palms were flat, calloused, scarred. The hands of a worker. "Quiet," I boomed. My voice didn't need a microphone. It carried over the yard like a thunderclap. The reporters fell silent. They sensed something. I wasn't cowering. I wasn't hiding behind a lawyer. I was standing there like a man who held 4 aces. "You have heard a story," I said, looking into the camera lens, knowing Tiffany was watching from her motel room. "You have heard a story about a poor son and a cruel father. You have heard about eviction and theft. You have heard tears and you have heard lies." I paused, letting the wind rattle the fence. "Before I reveal what really happened, take 1 second and drop a 1 in the comments, so I know you're still here with me. And just a quick note before we continue, the next part of this story includes some dramatized details for storytelling and reflection. It may not mirror real events exactly, so if that's not for you, feel free to stop the video here.
But you haven't seen the wedding video, I said. A few reporters looked confused. The wedding? What did a wedding have to do with this? My son spent $200,000 on his wedding, I continued. My money. He hired the best videographers in the city. But he forgot something. He forgot that the venue, the Four Seasons, has security cameras, high-definition security cameras. And when you own a construction company, you know that security footage is the only witness that never lies. I signaled to Big Mike. He hit a button on a laptop connected to a massive screen we had set up behind me. The screen flickered to life. It was a wide shot of the head table at the reception. The timestamp was 7:42 p.m. Watch closely, I said. The video zoomed in. Digital enhancement is a beautiful thing. The image was grainy but clear enough. There was Marcus standing next to me. There was Tiffany whispering in his ear. And there was me looking distracted, staring at the centerpiece. Look at his hand. I narrated, my voice cold. On the screen, Marcus reached into his pocket. He pulled out the packet. The light caught the foil. He looked around nervously. Then, quick as a snake, he poured the powder into my champagne glass. The reporters gasped, a collective intake of breath. That, I said, pointing at the screen, is my son, Marcus Washington. And that powder isn't sugar. The video continued. It showed Marcus turning his back to adjust the microphone. It showed me moving. It showed the switch, smooth, fast, the old shell game. And that, I said, is me saving my own life. I let the video play. I let them see the toast. I let them see Marcus drink. I let them see him fall. When the screen went black, the yard was silent. The anger was gone, replaced by shock. That wasn't food poisoning, I said, stepping back to the podium. That wasn't a stroke. That was attempted murder. I pulled a document from my jacket pocket. This is the toxicology report from the hospital, I said, holding it up. It confirms that Marcus ingested a lethal dose of carfentanil and epinephrine, a mixture designed to stop a heart instantly. It was meant for me. He drank it because I switched the glasses. I looked straight into the camera. I didn't evict a disabled man. I said, my voice shaking with a rage I had held back for days. I evicted an assassin. I evicted a man who looked me in the eye, toasted to my health, and tried to stop my heart so he could cash an insurance check. I slapped the toxicology report onto the podium. Tiffany St. James is on the internet crying about cruelty, I said. She is crying because her plan failed. She is crying because she is broke. She stood there and watched him pour the poison. She witnessed the forged signature on the insurance policy. She is not a victim. She is the architect. The reporters were frantic now, shouting questions, but the tone had changed. It wasn't accusation anymore. It was horror. Mr. Washington, are you pressing charges? Mr. Washington, where are they now? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Because at the back of the yard, the gate was opening. 3 black SUVs rolled in. Sirens weren't wailing, but the lights were flashing blue and red. Detectives stepped out. They weren't coming for me. I had sent them the video an hour before the press conference. I had sent them the toxicology report. I had sent them the forged deed and the insurance policy. One of the detectives walked up to the podium. He nodded to me, a nod of respect. We have seen enough, Mr. Washington, he said into the microphones. Based on the evidence provided and the forensic analysis of the glass secured at the scene, we are issuing immediate arrest warrants for Marcus Washington and Tiffany St. James. The charge, the detective said, looking at the camera, is conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, insurance fraud, and forgery. I stepped back from the podium. I felt lighter. The truth was out. The lie had been crushed under the weight of concrete evidence. I watched as the news feeds shifted. I watched as the reporters started broadcasting the new headline. Son tries to poison father at wedding drink swap, saves life. I took out my phone. I opened the live stream app Tiffany had been using. She was still online, but she wasn't crying anymore. She was staring at the screen of her own phone, watching my press conference. Her face was a mask of pure terror. She looked at Marcus, who was slumped on the motel bed, oblivious. They know, she whispered, her voice being picked up by her own microphone, broadcasting her fear to the world. Oh God, Marcus, they know. The comments on her stream had changed. The sympathy was gone. It was replaced by a digital lynch mob. Murderers. Rot in hell. Leave the old man alone. I typed one comment into the chat. Just one. Run. Then I closed the app. I looked at Big Mike. He was smiling. A grim, satisfied smile. You got them, boss, he said. Not yet, I said, turning toward my office. They are cornered.
And rats bite hardest when they are cornered. They will run, Mike. They have my credit card, the one I didn't cancel yet. They think it is their escape hatch. I walked back into the building. Let them run, I thought. Let them add flight to avoid prosecution to the list. I want them tired. I want them scared. And I want them to know that no matter how far they go, I am the one holding the leash. I sat down at my desk and pulled up the GPS tracker for the company car they had stolen. The black SUV was moving. It was leaving the motel, heading north, toward the border. I picked up the phone to call the detective. They are rabbits, I said, and the hunt is on. The notification on my phone didn't sound like a bell. It sounded like a trap snapping shut. Transaction approved. Shell Station, North Chicago, $45. I sat in the dark of my office, the blue light of the computer monitor reflecting in my eyes. The police were already at the motel, kicking down the door of room 112, but I knew what they would find. Nothing. Empty soda cans, a stained mattress, and the lingering smell of panic. My son and his wife were gone. They thought they were clever. They thought they had slipped the net. They had scrambled out the back window of the motel when the first siren wailed in the distance, dragging Marcus's useless leg over the sill, tumbling into the alleyway like garbage. They had made it to the black SUV, the company car that Marcus had stolen from the yard weeks ago, and they had hit the highway. But they made a mistake. A mistake born of arrogance and desperation. Marcus reached into his wallet and pulled out the one thing he should have destroyed, the emergency credit card. The black card. It was a supplementary card on my account, one I had given him 5 years ago when I thought he was finally growing up. I told him to use it only if his life was in danger. I guess in his twisted mind, getting caught for attempted murder counted as an emergency. He thought I had forgotten about it. Or maybe he thought I was too slow to check the statement. Or maybe he just didn't care because he needed gas and he was broke. I looked at the screen. The GPS dot on the credit card app was blinking. They were moving north, fast, 90 miles an hour on I-94. They were heading toward Wisconsin. The detective's number flashed on my screen. "Mr. Washington," he barked. "They are gone. The room is empty. We are putting out an APB on the vehicle." "Wait," I said, my voice calm, steady. "Don't put out the APB yet." "What are you talking about?" the detective asked. "They are fugitives. If you put out an APB now, you will catch them in the city limits," I explained, leaning back in my chair. "You will arrest them for what? Conspiracy, fraud, maybe attempted murder if the toxicology holds up. Those are state charges. They can get bail. They can get a good lawyer. They can drag this out for years." I watched the blue dot cross the county line. "But if they cross state lines," I said, my voice dropping. "If they flee across state lines to avoid prosecution, that is a federal crime. That is the FBI. That is no bail. That is serious time." The detective was silent for a moment. "You want them to run. I want them to bury themselves," I said. "I want the hole so deep they never see the sun again." I hung up. I didn't cancel the card. I didn't freeze the account. I authorized the transaction. I poured gasoline into their engine and let them drive straight toward hell. I watched them all night. I didn't sleep. I drank coffee and I watched the dots connect on the map. Transaction approved. Fast food drive-through, Milwaukee, $12. Transaction approved. Pharmacy, Green Bay, $40. Probably painkillers for Marcus. His leg must be screaming. They were driving relentlessly. They weren't stopping to rest. They were running on adrenaline and terror. They were heading north, due north. "They are going for Canada," I whispered to the empty office. It was a stupid plan. Canada has an extradition treaty. Canada isn't the Wild West. But they weren't thinking straight. They were thinking about distance. They thought if they could just get across that line, the nightmare would end. By dawn, they were in Minnesota. The terrain was getting rougher. The towns were getting smaller. They were getting close to the border crossing at International Falls. It was time to close the gate. I picked up the phone again. I called the detective. "They are in Minnesota," I said. "They are heading for the International Falls crossing. They will be there in 2 hours. We are contacting the Minnesota State Patrol," the detective said. "We will set up a roadblock." "No roadblock," I said. "Not yet. I want them stopped, but I want them stopped on my terms. That SUV they are driving," I continued. "It is registered to Washington Construction. It has a fleet GPS tracker installed in the chassis. I can disable the ignition remotely, but I won't do it on the highway. That is dangerous." I pulled up the satellite view on my other monitor. I looked at the road ahead of them. There was a small gas station about 10 miles from the border. It was isolated, surrounded by pine trees and snow, a dead-end place. "There is a station at mile marker 412, I said. "The last stop, gas and go. They will have to stop. They have been driving for 6 hours at high speed. They are running on fumes. And when they stop," I said, my finger hovering over the enter key on my keyboard, "I am going to report the vehicle as stolen, active theft, with the suspects armed and dangerous." "You can't lie to the police, Mr. Washington," the detective warned. "I am not lying," I said. "They stole the car, and they poisoned a man. That makes them dangerous in my book." I watched the dot. It was slowing down. They were taking the exit. They were pulling into the station. "Gotcha," I whispered. I hit the enter key. The stolen vehicle report was filed electronically with the priority flag for armed suspects. Then I opened the fleet management software. I typed in the admin password. I located the vehicle. Status engine running. I clicked the button labeled ignition kill. Status command sent. Engine disabled. On the screen, thousands of miles away, I knew exactly what was happening. Marcus would turn the key off to pump gas. When he tried to turn it back on, nothing would happen. The car was a brick. They were stranded in the middle of nowhere, 10 miles from freedom, with no car, no money, and the winter wind biting at their heels. I patched into the police scanner feed for Coochin County. The radio crackled to life. "Dispatch, we have a visual on the black SUV, matching the description of the stolen vehicle out of Chicago. Suspects are at the pumps. Proceed with caution." Dispatch crackled back. "Suspects are considered armed and dangerous. Attempted murder warrants active. Federal flight warrants active." I closed my eyes and leaned back. I could see it. It was a gray, desolate morning near the Canadian border. The air was freezing sharp enough to cut your lungs. The gas station was a relic, peeling paint and flickering neon. Marcus was sitting in the driver's seat, shivering. His paralyzed arm was a dead weight in his lap. He turned the key. Click. Nothing. He turned it again. Panic started to rise in his chest. Tiffany was in the passenger seat. She was wearing a coat she must have stolen or bought at a thrift store along the way. She was looking at the map on her phone. "Why aren't we moving?" she screamed. "Start the car, Marcus." "I can't," he yelled back, slamming his hand against the steering wheel. "It is dead. It won't start." They were fighting, screaming at each other, blaming each other. They didn't see the patrol cars rolling up silently, their lights off. They didn't see the state troopers moving through the tree line, their rifles raised. The radio scanner crackled again. "Units in position, moving in." I opened my eyes. I wanted to hear this. The scanner erupted in noise. "Driver, exit the vehicle. Hands in the air." "Do it now." I could hear the screams even over the radio static. Tiffany was shrieking. Marcus was trying to comply, but he couldn't. His left side was useless. He fumbled with the door handle. He fell out of the SUV, hitting the dirty concrete pavement with a sickening thud. He couldn't get his hands up. One hand went up. The other lay in the dirt. "Don't shoot," Tiffany screamed. "He is crippled. Don't shoot." She scrambled out the other side. She threw her hands up. She looked around wild-eyed, looking for a way out, looking for an escape route, but there was nothing. Just pine trees, snow, and the barrels of 10 service weapons pointed at her chest. "Get on the ground." On the ground now. They forced her down into the oil-stained slush. They cuffed her hands behind her back. She was crying, wailing about her baby, about being pregnant, about being innocent. Marcus was dragged away from the car. They weren't gentle. They didn't know he was paralyzed from poison. They thought he was resisting. They pinned him down. They cuffed him. "Suspects in custody," the voice on the radio said. "Scene is secure." I let out a breath I didn't know I had been holding. They were caught. Not in a luxury hotel, not in a comfortable home, but in the dirt of a roadside gas station, freezing and broken. I picked up my coffee cup. My hand was steady. I imagined them being shoved into the back of the cruisers. I imagined the long ride back to the county jail. I imagined the realization setting in that the credit card, the car, the escape plan, it was all a leash, and I had just yanked it tight. The detective called me back 10 minutes later. "We got them, Mr. Washington," he said. "They are in custody. The feds are already on their way to pick them up. They are looking at interstate flight, grand theft, auto, credit card fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder." "Good," I said. "Make sure they don't get bail." "They won't," the detective said. "Not with the flight risk. They are going to be guests of the state for a long time before trial." "Thank you, detective," I said. I hung up the phone. I looked around my office. It was quiet. The sun was fully up now. The construction yard outside was coming to life. Engines were starting, men were shouting, work was beginning. Life went on. But for Marcus and Tiffany, life had just stopped. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the city I helped build. I felt a pang of sadness, a deep hollow ache in my chest. I had won, but I had also lost. I had lost my son. I had lost the future I dreamed of. But then I remembered the glass. I remembered the smile on his face as he watched me lift the poison to my lips. I hardened my heart. You build the foundation you pour, I said to the glass reflection. If you pour it crooked, the house falls down. I turned away from the window. I had a business to run. I had a legacy to protect. And I had a trial to prepare for. Because catching them was only the beginning. Now came the judgment, and I was going to be the star witness. The air in the observation room was stale recycled and cold enough to preserve meat. I stood in the dark with my arms crossed over my chest, watching through the one-way mirror. It was like looking into an aquarium where the fish were slowly suffocating. In interrogation room 1 sat Tiffany. In interrogation room 2 sat Marcus. They were separated by a concrete wall, but they were connected by a web of lies that was about to be set on fire. Detective Miller stood next to me holding a styrofoam cup of coffee. He took a sip and grimaced. "They aren't talking Zeke," he said. "They are lawyer it up." Or at least they asked for lawyers. But since they fled across state lines and got caught with a stolen vehicle, the public defenders are taking their sweet time. We have a window, but it is closing. I looked at Tiffany. She wasn't crying anymore. She was sitting with her arms crossed, staring at the wall. She looked hard, calculated. She was running the numbers in her head, figuring out the odds. She thought if she kept her mouth shut, she might walk. She thought she was smarter than the cops. I looked at Marcus. He was slumped in his wheelchair, his paralyzed arm resting on the metal table like a dead fish. He looked broken. He looked like a child who had lost his mother in a grocery store. He was terrified. But in his eyes, I saw something else. Loyalty. Misguided, stupid loyalty. He was protecting her. He was keeping his mouth shut because he thought they were a team. He thought they were Bonnie and Clyde. He didn't know he was just the getaway driver. I reached into my jacket pocket. I pulled out the envelope I had taken from Tiffany's bag in the hospital, the one with the DNA test. I also pulled out the report from the lab Ray used, the one that confirmed the hair I took from Marcus's pillow didn't match the baby. I tapped the glass in front of Marcus's face. "He thinks he is doing this for his family," I said quietly. "He thinks he is sacrificing himself for his wife and his unborn son. He thinks that baby is the future of the Washington line." Miller looked at the envelope in my hand. "What do you have, Zeke?" I handed him the papers. "I have the truth," I said. "That baby isn't his. It belongs to a lawyer named Julian Thorne, the same lawyer who tried to get me to sign a fake will while my son was in a coma. They were partners, Miller, in every way." Miller opened the file. He scanned the percentages. He whistled low and long. "That is cold," he muttered. "That is ice cold." He looked at me. "You want me to show him?" I nodded. "Break him," I said. "Show him what he threw his life away for. Show him that while he was trying to kill his father, his wife was planning a future with another man." Miller straightened his tie. He picked up the file. He walked out of the observation room. I watched through this glass as the heavy metal door to room 2 swung open. Marcus looked up. He tried to straighten his posture, but his body wouldn't cooperate. "I am not saying anything," he mumbled, his speech still slurred from the poison. "I want my lawyer." Miller didn't sit down. He tossed the file onto the table. It slid across the metal surface and stopped right in front of Marcus's good hand. "We don't need you to talk," Marcus Miller said. "We have the video, we have the toxicology, we have the flight. You are going away for 20 years minimum." Marcus looked away. "I can do 20 years, he said, trying to sound tough. "For her," Miller asked, pointing at the wall that separated him from Tiffany. "You are going to do 20 years for the woman who convinced you to kill your dad." "She loves me," Marcus said. "We are in this together. We have a family, a son." Miller laughed. It was a harsh sound. "A son," he repeated. "You really believe that, don't you? You really think that baby is yours?" Marcus frowned. "Of course it is. Why would you say that?" Miller tapped the file. Because science says otherwise, kid. Marcus looked at the file. He didn't want to open it. He knew. Deep down in the dark pit of his stomach, he knew that something was wrong. But he had buried it under layers of denial because the truth was too painful to bear. "Open it," Miller commanded. Marcus reached out with a trembling hand. He flipped the cover. I watched his eyes scan the page. I saw the moment the words hit his brain. Excluded. Probability of paternity 0%. He stopped breathing. He read it again. And again. Then he turned the page. Subject B, Julian Thorne. Probability of paternity 99.9%. Marcus made a sound I will never forget. It wasn't a scream. It was a whimper. A high-pitched, broken sound like a dog being kicked. "No," he whispered. "No. That is a lie. You faked this." Miller leaned over the table. "We didn't fake it, Marcus. We found it in her bag. She had it the whole time. She knew before the wedding. She knew while you were pouring poison into your father's drink. She knew while you were lying in a coma. She was never building a life with you. She was building a life with Julian. You were just the bank account, and once you killed your dad and got the inheritance, you were going to be the next accident." Marcus started to shake. The paper rattled in his hand. Tears spilled from his eyes, hot and fast. "Julian," he choked out. "The lawyer, the guy who tried to steal the company," Miller confirmed. "They played you son. They played you like a fiddle." Marcus looked up at the mirror. He couldn't see me, but he looked right at where I was standing. His face crumbled. The arrogance, the greed, the anger, it all melted away, leaving only a raw, gaping wound. She told me she loved me." He sobbed. "She told me I was the only one." "She lied," Miller said softly, "about everything. And right now in the next room she is cutting a deal. She is telling us it was all your idea. She is saying you forced her. She is saying she was scared of you. That broke the dam." That lying bitch, Marcus screamed, slamming his good hand on the table. "She said that. She is throwing you under the bus," Miller said. "She is going to walk, Marcus. She is going to raise that baby with Julian while you rot in a cell, unless—" "Unless what?" Marcus asked, desperate. "Unless you tell us the truth," Miller said. "Unless you tell us whose idea it really was. Who bought the poison, who planned the wedding date, who forged the signature." Marcus didn't hesitate. The loyalty was gone, burned to ash by the DNA test. It was her, he shouted. It was all her. She found the poison online. She bought it with a prepaid card. She practiced Dad's signature for weeks. She told me we had to do it before the policy expired. She said Dad was old and he wouldn't feel a thing. Miller sat down and opened his notebook. "Tell me everything," he said. "Start from the beginning." And Marcus sang. He spilled everything. He told them about the dark web search history on the laptop she hid. He told them about the practice runs. He told them about the plan to make it look like a heart attack. He gave them dates, times, and locations. He buried her. Miller stood up after 20 minutes. He patted Marcus on the shoulder. "Sit tight," he said. Miller walked out of room 2 and came back into the observation booth. He was smiling. "We got him," he said. "He gave us everything. Now watch this." He walked into room 1. Tiffany looked up cool and composed. "I have nothing to say to you," she said. Miller sat down. He didn't offer her coffee. He didn't offer her a deal. "Marcus just confessed," he said simply. Tiffany blinked. Her composure cracked just a hairline. "He is lying," she said. "He is confused. The poison affected his brain. He told us about the laptop," Miller said. "The one you hid in the ceiling tiles of the apartment. We are executing a search warrant right now. He told us about the prepaid card. He told us about Julian." Tiffany's face went white. "Julian," she whispered. "Yeah," Miller said. "We know about the baby. We know about the paternity test. And so does Marcus." Tiffany closed her eyes. She knew the game was over. If Marcus knew about the baby, he wouldn't protect her. If he knew about Julian, he would destroy her. She opened her eyes. They were hard, flinty. "He is trying to blame me," she hissed. "He is a coward. He is the one who wanted the money. He is the one who owed the gambling debts." Miller nodded. "He did. But you are the one who forged the insurance policy witness signature, and you are the one who stood by and watched him pour the drink. It was his idea," Tiffany screamed, slamming her fists on the table. "He made me do it. He said he would leave me if I didn't help him. He said he needed the money or the loan sharks would kill us both. I was a victim. So, you admit you helped him? Miller asked. I admit I was present, she said, realizing her mistake too late. But I didn't pour it. He poured it. I just didn't stop him. That is conspiracy, Miller said. That is accessory to attempted murder. That is life in prison, Tiffany. Unless, she asked, her voice trembling. Unless you sign a confession, Miller said, sliding a piece of paper across the table. Allocution. You admit your part. You testify against him, and we take the death penalty off the table. We recommend 20 years instead of life without parole. 20 years, she whispered. I have a baby coming. Then you better sign, Miller said. Because in 5 minutes I'm going back to Marcus and offering him the same deal. And the first one to sign gets the recommendation, the second one gets the book thrown at them. It was the prisoner's dilemma played out in real time. And Tiffany St. James was not a woman who trusted anyone, not even her husband. Especially not her husband. Give me the pen, she said. She grabbed the pen and signed. Her hand was shaking so bad the signature was barely legible, but it was there. She admitted to the conspiracy. She admitted to the fraud. Miller took the paper. Thank you, he said. He walked out. He went back to room 2. He put a similar paper in front of Marcus. She just signed, Miller lied. She says you were the mastermind. She says you forced her. She is pinning it all on you, Marcus. Sign this, and we tell the judge you cooperated. Marcus signed. He signed his life away with tears streaming down his face. I stood in the dark booth and watched them. 2 people who had stood at an altar 3 days ago promising to love and cherish each other were now signing papers to ensure the other died in prison. It was a masterclass in selfishness. They destroyed each other. I didn't have to lift a finger. I just had to show them the truth and let their own greed do the rest. Miller came back into the booth holding the 2 confessions. Done, he said. 2 guilty pleas, we have them cold. I looked at Marcus one last time. He was staring at his hands, sobbing quietly. He looked small. He looked like the little boy who used to scrape his knees and come running to me for a Band-Aid. But that boy was gone. This was a man who tried to kill his father for a lie. I felt a tear run down my own cheek. It was hot and salty. I wiped it away quickly. Good work, detective, I said, my voice rough. I turned away from the glass. I couldn't watch anymore. The victory tasted like ash. I had won the war, but the battlefield was covered in the wreckage of my family. I walked out of the police station into the night air. It was raining. A cold Chicago rain that soaked through my jacket. I got in my truck. I sat there for a long time, staring at the windshield wipers moving back and forth. They were gone. Locked away. The threat was over. But I was going home to an empty house. A house that was supposed to be filled with grandchildren and laughter. I started the engine. You build what you build, Zeke, I told myself. And sometimes you have to tear it down to keep it from falling on you. I put the truck in gear and drove away, leaving my son in a cage of his own making. 3 months had passed since the night I watched my family disintegrate in the harsh light of a police interrogation room, but the air in the courthouse felt heavier than any concrete slab I had ever poured. The room was packed. Reporters who had feasted on the story for weeks were jammed into the back rows, their pens scratching against notepads like rats in a wall. The jury sat in their box, 12 strangers who held the remaining years of my life in their hands. And at the defense table, separated by 10 feet of empty space and a lifetime of betrayal, sat Marcus and Tiffany. They looked different now. Prison changes you even if you haven't been convicted yet. Marcus was still in a wheelchair, his left side slumped and atrophied, a permanent reminder of the cocktail he had mixed for me. He looked small, gray, and defeated. Tiffany, on the other hand, had leaned into her role. She wore a modest maternity dress that accentuated her growing belly. Her hair was pulled back loosely and she wore no makeup. She looked like a saint who had stumbled into a den of sinners. It was a costume just like the wedding dress. The trial had been a circus, but today was the finale. Today was the day the lies stopped. I sat in the gallery right behind the prosecutor's table, my hands folded over the head of my cane. I watched as Tiffany's lawyer, a slick man named Mr. Sterling, who specialized in getting guilty people out on technicalities, stood up to give his closing argument. He adjusted his expensive tie and walked toward the jury box, his face a mask of practiced empathy. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice soft and pleading. You have heard the prosecution describe a monster, a black widow, a woman who plotted to kill her father-in-law for money. But I ask you to look at this woman. Look at her condition." He gestured to Tiffany, who wiped a single tear from her cheek right on cue. "We have presented expert testimony from psychiatrists," Sterling continued. "Testimony that proves Mrs. Washington was suffering from severe anticipatory postpartum depression and hormonal psychosis. She wasn't thinking clearly. She was a woman on the edge, terrified of the future, terrified of bringing a child into poverty." I gripped my cane tighter. It was a bold lie. She wasn't crazy. She was calculated. "And let us not forget," he added, pivoting to point a finger at Marcus, who flinched. "She was under the influence of a desperate man, a man who owed millions to violent criminals, a man who threatened to leave her destitute if she didn't help him. She didn't buy the poison. She didn't pour the poison. She was a hostage in her own marriage, forced to go along with a plan she didn't have the strength to stop. It was a good story. It painted her as a victim and Marcus as the villain. It completely ignored the DNA test, the forged signature, and the recordings of her plotting my demise. But juries are fickle. Sometimes they like a good story better than the truth." The prosecutor, Ms. Vance, stood up. She was a sharp woman who didn't suffer fools. "The state calls Isaiah Washington to the stand," she said. A murmur went through the courtroom. I stood up. My knees popped. I walked down the center aisle, my boots echoing on the wood floor. I passed Marcus. He didn't look up. I passed Tiffany. She looked at me with eyes that were hard and cold, daring me to ruin her performance. I took the stand. I placed my hand on the Bible. I swore to tell the truth. And then I sat down and looked at the jury. I didn't glare. I didn't scowl. I just looked at them with the tired eyes of a father who has buried his son while he is still alive. "Mr. Washington," Ms. Vance said, standing near the jury box, "can you tell the court about your relationship with the defendant, Marcus Washington?" I took a deep breath. I looked at Marcus. I raised him alone. I said, my voice deep and steady, filling the room without a microphone. "His mother died when he was 2. I was working double shifts, pouring foundations in the rain and snow, but I never missed a breakfast. I never missed a football game. I built a company from a single pickup truck and a shovel so that he would never have to know what it felt like to have calluses on his hands." I paused, letting the weight of the years hang in the air. I gave him everything. I continued. An education. A home. A car. I paid off his debts even when I knew he was gambling it away. I thought if I loved him enough, if I gave him enough, eventually he would become a man. I was wrong. I didn't raise a man. I raised a parasite. The jury was listening. They weren't taking notes anymore. They were watching me. "Let's talk about the night of the wedding," Ms. Vance said. "Tell us what happened." I told them. I walked them through it step by step. The reception hall, the lights, the laughter, the way Marcus looked nervous, sweating in the air conditioning, the way Tiffany whispered in his ear like a snake in the garden. "I saw him take the packet out," I said. "I saw the powder go into the glass. It didn't fizz. It just disappeared. Like magic." "And what did you do?" Ms. Vance asked. "I waited," I said. "Why didn't you scream? Why didn't you call the police right then?" "Because I needed to know," I said, looking at Marcus. I needed to know if he would really go through with it. A part of me, the father part, hoped he would stop, hoped he would knock the glass over, hoped he would confess. So I waited. I gave him every chance to back out. But he didn't back out, did he? "No," I said. He turned his back to fix his microphone, and I switched the glasses. Ms. Vance nodded slowly. "Mr. Washington, the defense has argued that by switching the glasses you became the aggressor, that you poisoned your son. What do you say to that?" I looked at Sterling, who was scribbling furiously on his notepad. I looked at the judge, a stern woman with gray hair who had been watching me closely. "I didn't poison him," I said, my voice hard as steel. "He poisoned himself. He bought the drug. He poured the drug. He made the toast." I leaned forward, gripping the railing of the witness stand. "I didn't switch those glasses out of hate," I said. "I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because I had one last lesson to teach him. The only lesson he never learned in all those private schools I paid for." I looked directly at Marcus. He finally looked up, his face twisted in shame and fear. Whatever you intend to do to others, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried to the back of the room. Be ready to taste it yourself first. You wanted to stop my heart, son. So I let you feel what that is like. I let you drink your own intentions. The courtroom was silent. No one moved. No one breathed. It wasn't just testimony. It was a biblical judgment delivered by a father to his son. Ms. Vance let the silence stretch for a long moment. Thank you, Mr. Washington. No further questions. I stepped down. I didn't look at Tiffany as I walked back to my seat. She was done. Her story about postpartum depression had crumbled under the weight of simple, raw truth. You can't fake the kind of pain I just put on display. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they came back, they didn't look at the defendants. That is always the sign. Guilty. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. Insurance fraud. Forgery. Tiffany screamed. It wasn't a pretty movie scream. It was a guttural animal noise. She lunged toward the jury box, but the bailiffs were on her in a second. No, she shrieked. I have a baby. You can't do this. I am a mother. Marcus just sat there. He closed his eyes and lowered his head. He accepted it. Maybe in some small corner of his mind he knew he deserved it. The judge hammered her gavel, demanding order. She waited for Tiffany to be forced back into her chair, sobbing and heaving. The judge looked at them over the rim of her glasses. She looked at the papers in front of her. Then she looked at me. This is a tragedy of greed, she said, her voice cutting through the noise. A son who would kill his father for money. A wife who would manipulate a weak man to secure a fortune. You have shown no remorse until you were caught. You have shown no humanity. She looked at Tiffany. Mrs. Washington, or St. James, or whatever you call yourself now, using an unborn child as a shield for attempted murder is depraved. Your defense of hormonal imbalance is rejected. You were the architect. She looked at Marcus. And you, Mr. Washington, you betrayed the man who gave you life. You betrayed the man who gave you everything. There is no sentence I can give you that is worse than the knowledge of what you did, but I will try. She took a breath and delivered the hammer blow. Marcus Washington, I sentence you to 30 years in a state penitentiary without the possibility of parole. Tiffany St. James. I sentence you to 30 years in a state penitentiary without the possibility of parole. The gavel came down. Bang! It was over. Tiffany collapsed, wailing, dragging her nails down her face. Her lawyer packed up his briefcase, looking bored, already thinking about his next client. Marcus looked at me one last time as the bailiffs moved in to cuff his good hand to his wheelchair. His lips moved. He said something I couldn't hear over the commotion, but I could read his lips. I am sorry. I looked at him. I felt the tears prickling behind my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Not here. Not in front of the crowd. I just nodded once, a slow, solemn nod. It wasn't forgiveness, it was acknowledgement. I watched them being led away through the side door, Tiffany kicking and screaming, Marcus rolling silently into the shadows of the justice system. The reporters swarmed me as I stood up. They wanted a quote. They wanted a soundbite. Mr. Washington, how do you feel? Mr. Washington, is this justice? I pushed past them, my cane tapping a rhythm on the floor. I didn't say a word. There was nothing left to say. The foundation had been poured, the walls had been built, and now the door was locked. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright, blinding afternoon sun. The city was busy, cars honking, people rushing, life moving on. I stood on the steps and took a deep breath of the city air. It smelled of exhaust and hot pavement. It smelled like work. I had my life back. I had my company back. I was alone, yes, but I was standing. I walked down the steps one by one. I had a long drive ahead of me, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't have to look over my shoulder. The lesson was taught. The glass was empty. It was time to go home. The visiting room at the Stateville Correctional Center smelled like floor wax and old sweat, a combination that stuck to the back of your throat and refused to leave. It had been exactly 365 days since the gavel came down. 1 year. 4 seasons of silence. I had spent that year dismantling the last remnants of the life Marcus had tried to steal. I sold the house in Barrington. I liquidated the cars. I put the money into the trust I was building. But today wasn't about business. Today was about closing the final account. I sat on a metal stool bolted to the floor, staring at my reflection in the thick plexiglass partition. I looked older. The stress of the trial had carved new lines into my face, and my hair was more white than gray now. But my eyes were the same, clear, sharp, unforgiving. The heavy steel door on the other side of the glass buzzed and clanked open. A guard stepped in looking bored. Then came Marcus. I almost didn't recognize him. The man who wheeled himself into the room wasn't the arrogant prince in the tuxedo. He was a skeleton wrapped in a baggy orange jumpsuit. His head was shaved, revealing a scalp pale from lack of sun. His face was gaunt, his cheekbones protruding like blades under papery skin. The paralysis on his left side had settled into a permanent contracture. His arm curled against his chest like a withered wing. He looked small. He looked broken. He looked like he had aged 20 years in 12 months. The guard locked the wheels of his chair and stepped back. Marcus picked up the black phone receiver with a trembling hand. He wouldn't look at me at first. He stared at the counter, his eyes darting back and forth. I picked up my phone. "Hello, son," I said. His head snapped up. When our eyes met, I saw it, the desperation. It was raw and naked. He started to cry. It wasn't the fake sobbing from the trial. This was the ugly, snot-nosed crying of a man who has reached the bottom of the pit and found out there is a basement. "Dad," he choked out, his voice tinny through the receiver. "Dad, you came." "I came," I said simply. "Oh God, Dad." He wept, pressing his forehead against the glass. "I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I dream about it every night. The glass, the toast. I see your face. I see you drinking it. I wake up screaming." I didn't say anything. I just watched him. I watched the regret eating him alive. "It is hell in here, Dad," he continued, words tumbling out over each other. "You don't know what it is like. The noise, the fear. I am crippled, Dad. I can't defend myself. They steal my food. They push me out of line. I am scared all the time. Please, you have to help me." I gripped the phone tighter. My heart was aching, a dull throb in the center of my chest. No father wants to hear his child begging for mercy. No father wants to see his flesh and blood reduced to prey. "What do you want me to do, Marcus?" I asked, my voice level. "Get me out," he pleaded, his eyes wide and frantic. "You have money. You have connections. Hire a new lawyer. Appeal the sentence. Say you made a mistake. Say you coerced my confession. Anything. Just get me out of here. I will go anywhere. I will disappear. I just can't stay in this cage." I looked at him. I looked at the son I had tried to protect from the world, the son I had sheltered with my money and my sweat. "I can't do that, son," I said. "Why?" he screamed, slamming his good hand against the counter. "Why do you hate me so much? Is it punishment? Is that it? You want to see me suffer because I hurt you? Haven't I suffered enough? Look at me, Dad. Look at my arm. Look at my life. I am not punishing you, Marcus." I said, my voice soft but firm. "Then help me," he begged, tears streaming down his face again. "Save me. Please, Dad, save me." I leaned forward. I placed my hand against the cold glass palm, flat fingers spread wide. It was a hand that had built skyscrapers and bridges, a hand that had held him when he was a baby. "I did save you," I whispered. Marcus stopped crying. He sniffled, looking confused. "What?" he asked. "I saved you," I repeated. "By putting you in here, by leaving you here." He shook his head, not understanding. "Think about it, Marcus," I said. "Think about where you were a year ago. You owed $2 million to men who use power drills on kneecaps. You were addicted to gambling. You were married to a woman who was sleeping with your lawyer and plotting to kill your father. You were drowning, son. You were dead walking." I tapped the glass with my ring. "If I had let you go," I continued, "if I had let you walk away from that wedding, you would be dead right now. Big T and his boss wouldn't have waited for a foreclosure. They would have taken you out to a cornfield and put a bullet in your head. Or you would have gambled away whatever you stole and ended up in a gutter with a needle in your arm." Marcus stared at me, his mouth open. "In here," I said, gesturing to the concrete walls, "you are alive. You have 3 meals a day. You have doctors. You have time. You are safe from the loan sharks because I bought your debt and I told them you were off limits. You are safe from Tiffany because she is in a women's prison 3 counties over. You are safe from yourself." "Safe," he whispered bitterly. "I am in prison." "Yes," I said, "and prison is the only place where you couldn't dig the hole any deeper." I looked him deep in the eyes, trying to force him to see the truth. "Out there, you were a monster, Marcus. You were greedy. You were weak. You were willing to kill the man who gave you life for a check. In here you have a chance to be something else." "What?" he asked, his voice dripping with hopelessness. "A convict. A number. A man," I said. A man who owns his mistakes. A man who pays his debts. You have 30 years, son. That is a lifetime. You can spend it crying about how unfair it is. Or you can spend it figuring out how you lost your soul and how to get it back. I stood up. My knees popped. The visit was over. I had said what I came to say. Dad, wait. Marcus panicked, seeing me rise. Don't go. Please. I am lonely. I am so lonely. I have to go, Marcus, I said. Will you come back? He asked, his voice small like a child's. I looked at him. I saw the fear. I saw the regret. But I also saw the manipulation starting to creep back in the calculation. He was already thinking about the next visit, about how to work me, how to wear me down. No, I said. Marcus froze. What? I am not coming back, I said. This is it. You are abandoning me, he whispered. I am setting you free, I said. As long as I am in the picture, you will always be looking for a handout. You will always be looking for Daddy to fix it. You will never grow up, Marcus. Not really. You need to do this alone. You need to face the dark alone. That is the only way you will find the light. I hung up the phone. It clicked into the cradle with a finality that echoed in the small room. Dad Marcus screamed, though I couldn't hear him through the glass. I could see his mouth moving, forming the words, Dad, please, don't leave me. I love you. I looked at him one last time. I memorized his face, the face of my failure, the face of my love. I placed my hand on the glass one last time, covering his face from my view. Goodbye, son, I whispered to the empty air. I turned my back on him. I walked toward the door. I could feel his screams hitting my back. I could feel his eyes burning into my coat. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn around, to go back, to hold him, to promise him lawyers and money and freedom, to be the father who fixes everything. But I kept walking, because fixing it was what broke him in the first place. Loving him meant letting him fall. Loving him meant letting him break so he could maybe put himself back together the right way. I pushed open the heavy steel door and walked out into the corridor. The guard looked at me. You okay, Mr. Washington? He asked. I nodded, buttoning my coat. I am fine, I said. Just leaving the past where it belongs. I walked down the long gray hallway, the sound of my boots echoing off the concrete. I didn't look back. Not once. I walked out of the prison into the bright, blinding sunlight of the parking lot. I got into my truck. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I let out a breath that felt like it had been stuck in my chest for 30 years. It was done. The book was closed. I started the engine. The radio came on, playing an old blues song. I turned it up. I put the truck in gear and drove toward the gate. I had a long road ahead of me. And for the first time in my life, I was driving it alone. But the road was open, and the rearview mirror was empty. The sale of Washington Construction didn't happen in a boardroom with glass walls and expensive suits. It happened in the break room on a Tuesday morning over stale donuts and black coffee. I sat across from Big Mike and the 3 other senior foreman men who had been with me since we were pouring driveways in the 80s. They looked nervous. They thought I was shutting it down. They thought they were out of a job. I slid a contract across the scratched laminate table. It wasn't a termination notice. It was a transfer of ownership. I wasn't selling the company to a conglomerate. I wasn't selling it to a developer who would strip it for parts. I was selling it to them for $1. Big Mike stared at the paper, his hands shaking. He looked at the dollar bill I had placed on top of the document. Isaiah, he said, his voice thick with emotion. This is a $50 million company. You can't just give it to us. I am not giving it to you, I said, taking a sip of my coffee. I am burdening you with it. It is a beast, Mike. It eats your time. It eats your sleep. It eats your family if you let it. I fed it for 40 years. Now it is your turn to feed it. But treat it right and it will feed you back. I signed the line at the bottom. Isaiah Washington, former CEO, former owner. Just a man now. I stood up. I didn't make a speech. I didn't want applause. I shook their hands one by one. I felt the calluses on their palms, the rough skin of men who worked. These were the hands that deserved the kingdom, not the soft, manicured hands of a son who tried to poison his father. I walked out of the yard. I left my hard hat on the hook. I left my framed awards on the wall. I walked to my truck and I didn't look back. The noise of the jackhammers and the backup beepers faded behind me. It was the music of my life, but the song was over. Next came the house. I didn't hire a realtor. I called a liquidation firm. I told them to sell everything. The furniture Tiffany had picked out, the art Marcus had bought to look sophisticated, the dishes, the linens, the curtains. Sell it all, I said. Burn what you can't sell. I don't care. Just get it empty. I walked through the empty rooms one last time. The house echoed with the sound of my boots. It felt huge and cold. It had never really been a home. It was a showroom for a life I thought I was supposed to want. A life where success was measured in square footage and marble countertops. I walked into the master bedroom. I opened the closet. It was empty except for one box, a small cardboard box tucked in the corner. I opened it. Inside were Clara's things, her Bible, her reading glasses, a silk scarf she wore on Sundays, and a map. A folded, tattered road map of the United States from 1975. I unfolded it. The paper was soft and yellowed. There were lines drawn in red marker, routes we had planned when we were young and broke. We were going to see the world, we were going to drive to California, we were going to see the painted desert. But then Marcus came, and the business grew, and the red lines faded while we worked ourselves to the bone. I traced the line with my finger. It went all the way to the Grand Canyon. I am sorry, Clara, I whispered to the empty room. I am late, but I am coming. I took the box. I walked out of the front door and locked it. I dropped the keys in the mailbox. The deed was already transferred to a land trust. The proceeds from the sale, whenever it happened, would go to the account. The account. I went to the bank downtown. I sat in the office of the senior vice president, a woman who looked at my bank balance with wide eyes. $50 million. Liquid. I want to open a trust, I said. The Clara Washington Trade Initiative. It wasn't for college tuition. It wasn't for liberal arts degrees. It was for tools. It was for boots. It was for trade schools. It was for young black men and women who had no parents, who had no safety net, who wanted to learn how to build something real. I want full scholarships, I said. Tuition, room and board, and a set of tools for every graduate. I want them to know that you can build a life with your hands. I want them to know that there is dignity in sweat, the banker typed furiously. And the remaining balance, Mr. Washington. How would you like that invested? I don't want it invested, I said. I want it gone. I kept enough. I kept enough to buy gas and food for 20 years. I kept enough for emergencies. The rest, $48 million, went into the fund. I signed the check. I watched the zeros disappear from my ledger. And as the balance dropped, I felt my soul rise. The weight was gone. The target on my back was gone. I wasn't a millionaire anymore. I was just Zeke. I walked out of the bank, feeling lighter than air. I got into my truck and drove to the RV dealership on the edge of town. I didn't look at the massive bus-sized luxury coaches with 3 televisions and heated floors. I walked past them. I went to the back lot. There sat a Ford Chassis Class C motorhome. It was sturdy, compact, reliable. It had a bed, a small kitchen, and a big windshield. It was white with a simple blue stripe. I will take it, I told the salesman. I paid cash. I transferred my few belongings from the truck to the RV. My clothes, my fishing gear, Clara's box, and my coffee pot, an old percolator that made coffee thick enough to chew. I handed the keys to my pickup truck to a young mechanic in the service bay. It is yours, son, I said. Take care of it. It has a lot of miles, but a strong heart. He looked at me like I was Santa Claus. I climbed into the driver's seat of the RV. It smelled like new carpet and possibility. I put the key in the ignition. The engine turned over with a confident hum. I pulled out of the lot. I got on I-80 West. I drove past the skyline of Chicago. I saw the skyscrapers I had helped build. I saw the bridges I had poured. I saw the city that had made me and almost broke me. And then I watched it disappear in the side mirror. I drove for days. I didn't listen to the news. I didn't check my email. I listened to Motown and watched the cornfields turn into wheat fields and the wheat fields turn into mountains. I slept when I was tired. I ate when I was hungry. I didn't answer to anyone. I stopped in small towns where nobody knew my name. I sat in diners and talked to locals about the weather and the crops. I was nobody. And it was beautiful. I crossed the Rockies. I drove through the red dust of Utah. And finally, a week later, I arrived. Arizona, the Grand Canyon. I pulled the RV into a campsite right on the rim. It was late afternoon. The sun was starting to dip, painting the sky in colors that didn't seem real. Oranges, purples, reds deeper than blood. I stepped out. The air was dry and clean. The silence was massive. It wasn't the silence of an empty house. It was the silence of God. I walked to the edge. The canyon opened up before me, a gash in the earth so big it made everything else seem small. My business, my money, my son's betrayal. It all shrank in the face of that ancient stone. I set up a folding chair. I put Clara's box on the ground beside me. I took out her photo. She was young in the picture, smiling with that gap in her teeth I loved so much. "We made it, baby," I whispered. "It took 40 years, but we made it." I went back inside and fired up the percolator. The smell of coffee filled the small cabin. Comfortable, familiar. I poured a cup. Black, hot. I walked back to the chair and sat down. I watched the sun touch the horizon. The canyon walls caught fire, glowing with an inner light. I thought about Marcus sitting in his cell. I thought about Tiffany and hers. I thought about the poison in the champagne glass. I lifted my coffee mug. The steam rose into the cool desert air. "This isn't champagne," I said to the canyon, "and there is nobody here to toast me." I smiled, a real smile, one that reached my eyes. "But this is the best drink I have ever had." "To freedom," I said. I took a sip. It was bitter and hot and perfect. I sat there until the stars came out, millions of them. More stars than I had ever seen in Chicago. They hung over me like a blanket of light. I was 72 years old. I was alone. I had no home. I had no empire. But as I sat there watching the galaxy spin over the great abyss, I realized something. I had never been richer. I sat there for hours watching the embers of my small campfire fade from bright orange to a dull, dying gray. The desert night was cold, but it was a clean cold, not like the damp chill of a Chicago winter that gets into your joints and stays there. Out here, the wind felt like it was scrubbing me clean, peeling away layers of concrete dust and regret that had coated my skin for 40 years. I looked at the vast darkness of the canyon below. It was a void, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with millions of years of history, layers of rock built on top of each other, just like a life. For a long time, I thought my legacy was the buildings I put up, the steel and glass towers that scraped the sky, the foundations that held up the city. I thought my legacy was the money in the bank and the name on the side of the trucks. I thought my legacy was Marcus. I was wrong. My legacy wasn't what I built. It was what I refused to let be destroyed. I thought about Marcus sitting in his cell right now, probably sleeping, probably dreaming of the easy life he thought he was owed. For years I told myself that loving him meant fixing him. If he broke a toy, I bought him a new one. If he crashed a car, I paid the mechanic. If he got into debt, I wrote a check. I thought I was being a good father. I thought I was protecting him. But I wasn't protecting him. I was crippling him. I was cutting his hamstrings and then wondering why he couldn't run. Putting him in prison was the hardest thing I have ever done, harder than burying my wife, harder than facing down bankruptcy and the recession. It went against every instinct in my blood. A father protects, a father provides. But sometimes the only way to save a man from drowning is to stop swimming for him and let him kick his own legs, even if he swallows some water, even if he sinks a little. I had to break my own heart to save his soul. If he finds it in that cell, good. If he doesn't, at least he won't drag anyone else down with him. I did my job. I poured the concrete. I set the rebar. The rest is up to the structure itself. My phone buzzed on the small folding table beside me. The sound was jarring, loud, and artificial in the natural silence of the canyon. I looked at the screen. It was my lawyer, the expensive one who handled the final cleanup of the estate. I didn't want to answer, but old habits die hard. I picked it up. "Hello, Mr. Washington," the lawyer said, his voice crackling over the weak signal. "I hate to disturb you, but we received a notification from the state correctional system regarding Ms. St. James." I looked out at the stars. "Tiffany." "Go on," I said. "She went into labor early," the lawyer said. "She gave birth an hour ago in the prison infirmary. It is a boy. A boy. The innocent child used as a pawn in a murder plot. The child of a snake and a shark." The lawyer cleared his throat. "The state is looking for placement, Mr. Washington. Since Marcus is the husband of record, despite the DNA evidence, there is a legal gray area. They are asking if there is any family willing to take temporary guardianship. They called me to ask if you—" He trailed off. He knew the answer, but he had to ask. It was the law. I closed my eyes. I imagined a baby born behind bars, innocent, clean. I imagined bringing him into my RV, raising him, correcting the mistakes I made with Marcus, trying again. It was a tempting thought, a chance at redemption, a chance to be the father I thought I should have been. But then I remembered the poison. I remembered the greed in Tiffany's eyes. I remembered the entitlement in Marcus's voice. That baby wasn't my blood, and even if he was, I was 72 years old. I had done my time. I had fought my wars. Tell them to call Julian Thorne, I said, my voice flat. Tell them to call the biological father. Send him the DNA results again if you have to. It is his responsibility, not mine. But Mr. Washington, the lawyer, hesitated. If Julian refuses, the child goes into the system. Foster care. I looked at the vast open space before me. The freedom, the peace. Then he goes into the system, I said. Maybe he will have a better chance there than he would with the people who created him. Maybe starting from zero is a blessing. I started from zero. It made me who I am. Are you sure? The lawyer asked. I am sure, I said. Do not call me about this again. Do not call me about Marcus. Do not call me about Tiffany. The file is closed. I hung up. I didn't just hang up the call. I held the power button on the side of the phone. I held it until the screen went black. Then I slid the back cover off, pulled out the battery, and pulled out the SIM card. I walked to the edge of the canyon. I threw the SIM card into the dark. I watched it disappear, a tiny speck of plastic carrying a lifetime of noise. I walked back to the RV. I poured the rest of the coffee onto the fire, extinguishing the last of the embers. Steam hissed and vanished. I climbed into the driver's seat. I turned the key. The engine rumbled to life, a deep, steady sound that felt like a heartbeat. I didn't look at the map. I didn't need to know where I was going. I just needed to know I was moving. West, toward the ocean, toward the rest of my life. I put the RV in gear and pulled out onto the asphalt. The headlights cut through the night, illuminating the yellow lines of the road. I was Zeke, just Zeke. And for the first time in 32 years, I was free. Looking back, this is the truth I've learned. Don't become the man I was. I believed love meant fixing everything, and that belief led me into family betrayal. This family story cracked while I called denial loyalty. I ignored warnings because pride felt safer than truth. I confused generosity with responsibility, and the cost was family betrayal. God does not reward blindness. God does not bless control disguised as care. God asks us to choose truth, even when it costs the people we love. If there's one lesson here, it's this: don't save someone by destroying yourself. Enabling harm only deepens family betrayal, leaving scars for generations inside a family story. Walk away sooner than I did. Set boundaries before resentment hardens your heart, and pray for wisdom instead of power. If this family story made you reflect, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe. Thank you for staying until the end. Upcoming stories may include fictionalized elements. For education, feel free to step away if that's not for you.